November 5th, the day we have been anticipating for a long time. Election night is finally here, and we welcome you inside our ACU TV or studio on the campus of Abilene Christian University. Live on election night, I'm Daisy Strine, here alongside Zion Webb, and we're excited to have you join us tonight as we unpack this election with live updates and a wide variety of interviews guiding us as the night goes on. But before we get started, we want to take a look to first acknowledge our crew behind the scenes. That's right, we have an amazing crew of 20 students here tonight behind the scenes, some of which you'll see on camera, but most of them will be hard at work in the studio. This night would not be possible without our crew and director Hutton Harris, assistant director Emily Rose, along with Riley Fisher, our production engineer. Let's take a look at our executive producers. These 4 students have been working hard to make sure tonight runs smoothly, and we have enjoyed working together to produce the second ever ACU TV election show. We are proud of all the hard work these 4 individuals have put in to make this vision come to life. That's right. Many students on our ACU TV crew, as well as some members of the Optimist News team, are hard at work tonight. And right down the hall is the KACU radio station. We'll hear more from them tonight during our breaks. That's 3 well-rounded student media organizations represented tonight throughout our show this evening. Kicking off our first hour, we'll start with an interview from Dr. Neil Coates explaining the Electoral College, which is one of the most misunderstood aspects of elections, followed by a live in-studio interview with Dr. Randall Fowler, a political rhetoric expert and professor here at ACU. And to wrap up the hour, we'll discuss the recent controversy regarding the integrity of mail-in ballots. Now, let's send it over to the second half of our executive producer team, Roman Raffelli and Ashley Henderson.
Thanks, Zion. The first thing we want to take a look at tonight is the Electoral College, which is one of the most misunderstood aspects of elections, yet it's one of the most important factors.
That's right, Roman. Tonight we will focus in on our 7 major swing states: Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and of course, Pennsylvania. This election is a race to 270 electoral votes. With more on that, we will send it over to Case Kirby.
Thank you, Ashley. The Electoral College designates a number of points that each state is worth based on their population or number of representatives. For example, Texas has 40 electoral votes, while Colorado has only 10. If Vice President Harris were to win the popular vote in the state of Colorado, all 10 points would be hers. This Electoral College map is from the 2016 election. The total number of electoral votes in the entire country is 540, so the first candidate that makes it to 270 electoral votes would pretty clearly be the winner, or 270 to win, as it's commonly referred to. Now, not all states are like this. Maine and Nebraska use the congressional district method to distribute their electoral votes. This map is from the 2020 election. In Nebraska, there are 3 congressional districts, and whichever candidate wins each one gets a point for each district. Then, whichever candidate wins the popular vote for the entire state gets 2 electoral votes. So, in 2020, former President Trump won congressional districts 1 and 3, but President Biden won District 2. And Trump won the popular vote for the entire state, so he won another 2 electoral votes. I had the chance to sit down with Dr. Neil Coates here at ACU and talk more about the Electoral College during this sit-down interview. Let's take a look.
Thank you, Dr. Coates, for joining me. So just a quick question to start us off. What is the Electoral College overall, and how does it work?
So I will first of all say that the Electoral College is brilliant. I'll just use an adjective to say that the founders of this country knew very well that King George III was not the way they wanted to go. They did not want a king. And under the Articles of Confederation, we didn't even have a president. We only had a Congress, and we didn't even have federal courts. So with the compromises that make up the 1789 Constitution, they made several brilliant decisions. And one of those was to have a peaceful and fair way of selecting the president. We were going to be the first country in the world with such a device or such a person or such a political system, if you will, because that's what the president has come to be. So the Electoral College gives power to the states for each of them to have their own election. And in fact, the Constitution allows every state, even to this day, to decide how their Electoral College votes will be calculated. And so this system has, been around now for more than 200 years, and we're really the only country in the world that uses this type of a presidential election system, but it gives power to the states and doesn't allow things to get too out of whack. And so that's a really important, great thing about America.
Mm-hmm. So in 1969, there was a bit of a pushback against this. Both political parties had voted on kind of getting rid of it or trashing it, shutting it down. And it made it past the House of Representatives, but it got shut down at the Senate by Southern senators. Can you talk about if there's been any pushbacks in the past, especially ones that were maybe memorable, maybe in the news, something along those lines against the Electoral College?
So when we say maybe the Senate shut it down, whether it's by filibuster or just not by approving it, that's actually a good move. Why do I say that? Because since then, there has not been another attempt to do this. And really, when you do hear the Electoral College kind of murmured against, even to this particular election, it's by persons who might not win it, but they might win the popular vote. And of course, we don't select a president by popular vote. We still think it's important to have it as a state-by-state process, but also to not let the states and the cities that have such a high population be the driving force in American politics. We want our president to be elected in a system where they still have to go to Vermont and they still have to go to Wyoming, and they might even make a couple of trips to Alaska, because every vote can count in the Electoral College, and we don't want candidates only spending all their time in Houston and in Los Angeles and New York and Chicago and a few other places, and that's what it would become. And so it's partly to preserve the rural nature of the country, but also to really protect the states that don't have as many people in them. And so we are actually protecting the minority from the majority.
Thank you. So when we talk about the minority over the majority, following along with this, 48 out of the 50 states do the Electoral College in a pretty normal way as far as electoral points go. 2 are fairly different. They use the congressional district method. I was curious if you could talk about Nebraska and Maine and how they do this different, and possibly how that can change the outcome of the Electoral College results.
So I'll get this precise just by reading about it, and also because it'll surprise some of your watchers. These 2 states that you've mentioned, Maine and Nebraska, the popular vote in each congressional district gets that district's electoral vote, and the statewide winner gets 2. So this means that the candidate with a majority of the popular vote in a particular state gets all the Electoral College votes for that state, but not in Maine and Nebraska. They wanted this to be a compromise. Part of it is there are a lot of people in Omaha, a lot of people in Lincoln, and so if they do what the Constitution says, allow every state to determine its Electoral College votes as it sees fit, they thought this would just be appropriate. Now, this particular cycle, the Trump campaign, thinking that it would be a lot closer a month ago, they did send at least one surrogate to the Nebraska legislature to talk about, can we change this? The Nebraska legislature, they held firm. They decided this would be what was right for them, and so President Trump has just had to look for other places to get those Electoral College votes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Dr. Coates, I cannot thank you enough for coming here today and helping answer some questions. We appreciate your insight greatly, and thank you.
Sure.
Thank you again to Dr. Coates for providing more insight into the process of the Electoral College.
Earlier, we mentioned KACU right down the hall from our studio. As we take a quick break, we'll briefly tune into their NPR radio broadcast. We'll be right back.
things end up.
Let's turn now to the governor's race. They're also hotly contested. Mark Robinson is the Republican candidate, and he's been embroiled in scandal, as many may remember, during this campaign. Refresh our memory quickly as to what happened and where the race stands now.
Yeah, so Mark Robinson, the Republican lieutenant governor here, was the subject of a CNN report back in September that found that he had posted pro-Nazi, pro-slavery comments on a pornographic website. That really tanked his campaign. The campaign staff largely quit. He lost a lot of support from national Republicans, stopped running ads, and has been way behind in the polls. And so there's been a worry that that could be a drag on Trump in this state. So far, doesn't seem to be the case. Robinson is polling, I think, 10 percentage points behind Trump in the results we've seen so far. So voters really splitting their tickets a lot in Republican areas where they still want Trump for president, but they have soured on the Republican nominee for governor here.
Right, and of course, we're still waiting for a race call in the state of North Carolina from the Associated Press. While we wait, Colin, I'll just ask, what other races in the state are you watching closely?
So we're also watching the state superintendent of public instruction. That's usually a pretty sleepy race to sort of oversee the education bureaucracy in public schools here. But that was also a very far-right candidate, Michelle Morrow, the Republican in that race, who's called for the public execution of Barack Obama. An old social media post. She's called schools indoctrination centers and has never had any experience in the classroom of a school building herself. So that's another race which seems like it may be very close, but certainly has gotten a lot of attention as sort of a barometer of just how far to the right Republican candidates in down ballot races in the state are and what impact that has overall.
No swing state has more electoral votes than Pennsylvania. It will be a challenge for either candidate to win the White House without it. Donald Trump has leveled baseless claims of, quote, massive cheating in the state. Philadelphia City Commissioner Chair Omar Sabir addressed these claims at a press conference.
Philadelphia elections are safe, simple, and secure, and they have always been. There is no cheating. There's no smoke to it. People say things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's true. We've learned this in 2020. We have hard-working people trying to give the citizens of America the election that they deserve.
NPR voting correspondent Hansi Lawang is in Philadelphia. Hi, Hansi.
Hey, Ari.
Tell us more about this back and forth between the Trump campaign and Pennsylvania election officials, along with a spate of legal challenges in the state.
Well, the latest is that earlier today, former President Donald Trump posted on his social media platform that there's, quote, a lot of talk about massive cheating in Philadelphia, law enforcement coming, unquote. It's not clear exactly what former President Donald Trump is referring to. The city's district attorney, Larry Krasner, responded with a statement saying, quote, no factual basis whatsoever within law enforcement to support this wild allegation. But Trump has been making these kinds of baseless claims specifically about Pennsylvania for weeks now. You know, there has been an investigation into potentially fraudulent voter registration forms, and let me say that again, voter registration forms, not ballots, as former President Donald Trump has claimed, and this is in 4 counties. But state officials say this attempt to defraud the voter registration list in Pennsylvania has been, quote, defeated, that the system worked in order that they could find these potentially fraudulent forms. Some have been declared valid, so it's not quite clear what former President Trump is referring to.
And there have also been challenges to voters' mail-in ballot applications in a number of counties.
Yes, at least 14 counties, more than 4,000 challenges to the mail ballot applications, mostly for overseas voters. These are U.S. citizens living abroad, and they are under federal law allowed to vote in federal elections. And because they last lived in Pennsylvania, that's where they're registered in these counties. And, you know, the county election officials have been scrambling to get ready for today to set up those polling sites that just closed. And then they got this wave of challenges on Friday on top of all the preparations. And they've been scrambling to hold hearings to review these challenges. And it's turning out that a lot of these are mass-produced, some by right-wing activists, some also by Republican state senators who are challenging these mail ballot applications. And in fact, we're seeing a state senator withdraw some applications for really without much of a fight. So it's really unclear what their intentions are, but there's a lot of concern that folks are being put at risk, registered voters being put at risk of having their voting rights taken away from them.
Hansi, I'm just going to jump in here and go over to our colleague Susan Davis because we have a race call in the state of North Carolina.
It's a race call, but not the one you're thinking of, Juana. It is an important race call, but not for president. In the governor's race, North Carolina Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein has won the state's race for governor, according to a race call by the Associated Press. He defeated Republican Lieutenant Governor Mark Robinson. His campaign was bogged down with scandal in the weeks and months leading up to Election Day, so this is not a surprise. One of the big questions here was whether Robinson could be such a drag on the Republican ticket that it could have an effect on other races, including the presidential race and one competitive House race in that state. Again, not a surprising outcome, but we're still waiting to see the bigger question of who wins North Carolina in the presidential race.
Again, just to recap, North Carolina Democratic Attorney General Josh Stein has won the state's race for governor. That is according to a race call by the Associated Press. We are still waiting for a race call as to who has won that state in the presidential race, along with the rest of those 7 key states that we are watching in the race.
And welcome back inside the studio. As polls come in and we get to see a better picture of what the election will look, we're starting to see some results here. And Ashley, what are you seeing so far?
Yeah, so about 18 states have closed their polls so far. We're still waiting for polls to close in some battleground states, including Georgia and North Carolina. One of the most influential states, Pennsylvania, was supposed to have closed by now, but voting was extended due to a malfunction that prevented some voters from scanning their ballots. So we will revisit Pennsylvania later in the night, as it could be crucial to a potential victory by former President Donald Trump. Roman, what do you think about those results?
Well, I certainly do think it is disappointing to see the issues happening in Pennsylvania, but as we take a closer look here, we're really seeing how close this race may be. At the moment, Trump currently has 101 projected votes, while Kamala has 71, and Trump has taken a majority of the South, while a lot of Vice President Harris, her votes are more up northeast. So it's going to be a very close race here, and as Georgia seems to be leaning towards Trump, definitely an interesting race so far.
Yeah, so we are definitely not done yet. We still have a lot of results that we're waiting on, and we will visit those results later on. But for now, we are going to send it over to Daisy, who has Dr. Fowler in the studio with her.
Thanks, Ashley. I'm here with Dr. Fowler, one of my professors, a professor in the Communication and Sociology department here at Abilene Christian University. Dr. Fowler, thanks for joining us tonight.
I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So starting off, you have a book coming out soon this month. You want to tell us about that?
I do. So I have a book. It's called Securing the Prize. It's about presidential metaphors and the ways that these metaphors have helped structure Americans' understanding of the Middle East and the American stake in the Middle East. So if you've ever wondered why Americans have so many military bases, why the United States is so invested in that region, it's a great read, and it'll help you fall asleep at night if you don't enjoy it.
Great. Well, as we dive into this election and the campaigns that we've seen both candidates have throughout the past few months, what do you see as some major rhetorical themes throughout their campaign, starting maybe with Trump's?
Yeah, so Trump is a populist through and through, which means that he thinks of himself as the champion of the people against the elites, however those elites are defined. So in that way, he echoes a lot of previous presidential aspirants and political candidates in our history. One of the main touch points for him is that he talks about fighting the fight of the people against those that are against them. So that's a major touch point for him. We saw that through the entire presidential campaign, going all the way back 2 years, through the 2022 midterms, up through the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, all the way through to today.
And obviously, as the campaigns start all the way to the end on election night, how have we seen his rhetoric kind of change as his campaign has gone on?
Certainly. So he started off against Biden talking about the age issue, talking about how he was more vigorous and strong in the United States positioning in the world. He did a lot of talking about why the United States would be stronger economically, militarily, diplomatically under his leadership than Joe Biden. So he tried to do the strength versus weakness contrast. Fast forward to the summer, whenever he found himself up against Vice President Harris. And Vice President Harris is a much different opponent for Donald Trump. And so he floundered for a bit through the month of August before he really found his footing, trying to contrast himself as a conservative right-wing champion versus what he called her as a San Francisco Democrat liberal. Up to now, he started to sound more optimistic notes. He's very notably brought in different people to endorse him. Elon Musk is campaigning for him. He's found lots of endorsements among the Arab American community in Michigan in particular. And so what he's done is tried to build this broad-based coalition that seems to be his closing argument for the campaign.
Absolutely. And then as we shift our lens to look at Kamala's campaign, what are your thoughts on her rhetoric as it's gone on throughout the past few months as well?
Certainly. So Vice President Harris has done a lot in 3 months' time to gin up an entire presidential campaign. So she started off inheriting Biden's campaign infrastructure. It's really difficult to build an entire campaign operation. And so rather than try to locate it in a place where she has more grounding, she simply inherited Biden's advisors, his campaign infrastructure, and has tried to run his campaign in a way with her imprint on it. So the headquarters is still in Delaware, the advisors are still the same, but through the summer she emphasized hope, she emphasized joy as major touch points, reintroducing herself to the country. A lot of what she was trying to do was rebrand herself from a senatorial career and a career as a prosecutor in California that might not have lent itself well to this particular campaign season. Then as we fast forward into August and September, she contrasted herself with Trump in a lot of other ways. She tried to be much more relatable, more contrasting the age issue to her advantage during the campaign and particularly during the debate night. And then ultimately she's closed with the argument that Biden was making, which is that Trump is a threat to democracy. And so we've seen her campaign and her in particular hammer that note home very strongly. And so we'll see if it pays off tonight.
All right, that's great. And let's back up and take a little bit of a look at some historical parallels. We talk a lot about this in class, kind of previous presidents and how we're seeing parallels today in certain campaigns, such as Trump and Kamala's campaigns.
Certainly. So there's a lot of historical parallels, and of course, I teach a whole class in this, so I won't bore you all with it. But I think there's a couple of different examples that stand out to me. First of all, Trump, trying to represent the people, seems to be trying to channel FDR in a way. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a hugely popular president because of the strong sense of identification that he created with his followers. Now, FDR was much more successful in building a broader base than Trump has been, but what we see amongst Trump supporters is that they feel a very strong sense of investment in him as a candidate and as a political leader, and he and them as followers. So something we'll see with him is whether he can expand that sense of identification tonight. But either way, he also tries to channel the populist energies of other lesser-known political figures like William Jennings Bryan or other populist leaders like Pat Buchanan, maybe a more conservative-leaning one. And of course, we can't forget about Grover Cleveland, the only president to win the presidency, lose re-election, and come back and win the presidency again. So could history repeat itself? We'll find out tonight.
We will find out. And as we kind of look forward past this election, obviously we're going to have an outcome here soon, hopefully this evening. Sometimes we don't know if it's going to be a week. But once we do receive an outcome tonight, depending on whichever way it goes, how do you see the rhetoric that has been used in these campaigns shifting forward to the campaigns to come in the future, maybe involving vice presidents that may come into office as well?
Certainly. So if Trump wins, I think he has a clear heir apparent in J.D. Vance, his vice presidential candidate. Harris, her different historical antecedents might be a hint into who she would invent herself to be as a president. So her campaign has at times tried to echo Barack Obama with its hope-filled messaging. At other times it sounded more like Hillary Clinton with a much more laser focus on bread and butter issues, national security as well. And of course at other times she's inherited the role of Hubert Humphrey, who had to come in mid-campaign in 1968 after Lyndon Johnson withdrew. So I think for her, if she wins, we might see a period of her trying to decide which major players among the Democratic base she wants to align herself with. How will that inform policy going forward? And we'll see if that changes the nature of the Democratic coalition. If Trump wins, of course, it'll solidify his populist conservative fusion, and we'll see if he would be able to pass that on successfully to J.D. Vance or another successor.
All right, and obviously whenever it comes into the realm of rhetoric and persuasion tactics, we see a lot of that come in whenever it comes to fashion and the way that people can appear. So throughout the campaigns, how have you seen fashion, especially in a woman candidate, coming up that we don't always see in history, but obviously that plays a large role in the fashion and in the style that each candidate represents?
Absolutely. So scholars like to talk about the double bind that female political candidates face. In the United States, that's typically defined as wanting to appear masculine enough for the rough world of politics, but not so masculine that a female candidate forgets her femininity. And so we saw this with the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016, and that was something she faced for a very long time in her political career, was accusations that perhaps she was not masculine enough or feminine enough. And we've seen a little bit of that with Harris as well. We'll see if She again succeeds where Clinton fell short in running for the president, but Hillary Clinton dressed perhaps in a way that Harris hasn't. She's avoided framing herself explicitly as the female candidate, and her political rhetoric has mostly emphasized in style themes of hope, themes of positivity, democracy, and those themes might not translate to victory, but they certainly tell a different story. And her dress is, of course, part of that. I am no sartorial expert, but what I can say is that certainly she presents herself smartly, and she is someone who contrasts herself perhaps with even Jill Biden, who comes across as perhaps a more matronly figure as the First Lady.
Right, and as we continue tonight, we're going to have live updates across the top of the screen, as you can see above us right now. But as we continue to talk about style in candidates, we have a story coming up from our very own Melania Vance. She has a story on Kamala Harris and her tan suit scandal. Dr. Fowler, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
Now, Melania, over to you.
Thanks, Daisy. Fashion does play a huge role in this election. Back in August, Kamala Harris wore a tan suit, which caused controversy because a former successful president, Barack Obama, wore it, as you can see here. She says she is unafraid to carve her own path forward, explaining how she wants to make her own fashion statements within her campaign. I spoke with Candace Orpaz-Weiser about her newly published book, Palgrave Handbook of Fashion and Politics. We took a deeper look into how fashion is tied into politics and in and outside of America. Let's take a look.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Candace. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Thank you for having me. Well, I believe we're talking about my most recent book that I wrote with 3 other co-editors, and it's called The Palgrave Handbook of Fashion and Politics. And the other 3 women I worked with to do this book, we solicited chapters from people all over the world to talk about how fashion impacts politics in various countries and also how it impacts different actors in politics. So we want to know how fashion is pertinent to politicians, as well as maybe people who are in protest movements who choose to wear some particular color or costume to demonstrate their goals, or even how throughout history people have worn different uniforms even to be a part of war or special political clubs.
Perfect. Could you bring up the pantsuit? And we all know Kamala and the tan pantsuit with Obama and his tan pantsuit. Do you think that it could be beneficial for her and her campaign to mirror someone so successful as Obama?
I think the pantsuit is an interesting phenomenon historically because women were expected to wear skirts for a lot of the 20th century, of course. So pantsuits as sort of a uniform of the woman politician wasn't something that was common until the 1990s. So just wearing a pantsuit as a woman itself is something that is kind of path-breaking historically. We probably don't recognize it as path-breaking as much anymore because we've grown used to a lot of women wearing the pantsuit. So a lot of people are familiar with Hillary Clinton wearing pantsuits. So when Kamala Harris wears the pantsuit, it doesn't really seem out of the ordinary or really path-breaking. But in terms of history, it should be considered that way. Now, when we talk about the tan pantsuit, people are often referring back to the fact that Obama wore a tan suit at one point, and he was judged that that did not look formal. So another thing about the normative uniform of a man who's in politics is that it's not just that they wear a suit and tie, it's largely expected that they wear dark colors. So dark suits, and then the colors tend to be dark or maybe even red or blue to show their patriotism. So when you don't wear a dark suit, people are going to notice that. And so when Obama did not wear a dark suit, people noticed that, and he got a lot of criticism for it. Now, when Kamala did that, that made a lot of people remember what Obama did, and it made her look like she was doing something, I guess, a little out of the ordinary or challenging what had previously been considered maybe negative or pessimistic. People didn't like Obama's tan suit, and then she said, you know what, I'm actually going to own it and I'm going to wear it. So it showed a certain level of confidence because the tan suit had been critiqued so strongly when Obama wore it.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Candace. Everyone go check out her new book, Palgrave Handbook of Fashion and Politics.
Great work, Melania. Welcome back into the studio. Daisy Strine, Zion Webb here. We have some live updates coming in, as you can see in our graphics. Trump has won Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, South Carolina, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Oklahoma, Arkansas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, and Louisiana. Also, as we look at the states that Kamala has won, she's won Vermont, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, Maryland, Illinois, Delaware, New Jersey, and New York. So we have a lot of polls on the eastern side of the U.S. closing, and we're starting to get those results in. Donald Trump at 120, Kamala at 99. Zion, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, we talk about right now that Donald Trump, he's up 120 to 99 like you just said. But if we look here in Michigan, that's one of our 7 swing states. And Kamala Harris currently is up in that state. Only 10% of the votes are counted at the moment. But overall, we'll see how that goes at the end of the night. Talk about Pennsylvania as well. Another one of our swing states. She's leading in that as well. So looking forward for the night. You can see that Donald Trump is up. And a lot of the states haven't been called that we expect to go into Kamala's hair. So we'll look forward to seeing those.
We're also waiting to take a look at Ohio, another state that has been a little bit back and forth in this election. We're going to wait on polls to close in those states, votes to be counted, and results to get in. We'll be here to update you live on that. Also, Pennsylvania, we touched on, one of the most prominent swing states with 19 electoral votes in this election. We're going to wait on Pennsylvania as they continue to count votes. Hopefully, they'll get those in as soon as possible. We'll be here to update you on that. But for now, we're going to send it over to Jameson Saradic so that he can update us on some monumental moments in this election. Jameson, we'll send it right over to you at our screen.
Thanks, guys. On July 13th, 2024, there were alarming assassination attempts against former President Donald Trump. This raised important questions about the safety of people running for office as we head into this election. Throughout American history, there have been sad events where presidents were killed. Here's a quick look at some of them. Abraham Lincoln, he was shot on April 14th in 1865, and he died the next day. And then James A. Garfield, he was shot on July 2nd, 2 days before July 4th in 1881, and he died from his injuries on September 19th of 1881. William McKinley was shot on September 6th, 1901, and he passed away on September 14th, 1901. And then, as more recently, John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated on November 22nd of 1963 in Dallas, Texas, just about 180 miles from where I'm standing at right now. Now, several presidents have also faced assassination attempts on their life, and here are some examples of those. Andrew Jackson, someone tried to kill him on January 30th, 1835, but it didn't work. Theodore Roosevelt was shot in the chest, but he was saved because of the glass holding his speech. Theodore Roosevelt was shot on October 14th, but he survived. Franklin D. Roosevelt was shot, and there was an attempt on his life in 1933, which failed. Harry S. Truman faced an assassination attempt on November 1st, 1950, but he was safe. Gerald Ford had 2 attempts on his life in 1975, and both of those were unsuccessful. More recently, Ronald Reagan was shot on March 30th, 1981, but he lived through it. And then this year, most recently, former President Donald Trump. This sparked numerous questions. Well, what if the presidential candidate dies before the election? Here's what usually happens. There would be a party replacement. The political party can choose a new candidate through a meeting or convention. The election continuation, if the election goes ahead and the deceased candidate is still on the ballot, votes for them might be counted, but the party will need to prepare for a new replacement. The Electoral College, if the deceased candidate wins, the Electoral College would still meet, and the party would pick a new candidate. Now, if it's within the states, different states have specific rules about how to handle those ballots in those situations. These events are rare, but they bring up important questions about how we keep our leaders safe and make sure for these elections to run smoothly. We've got more coming up, but first we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right here back on ACU TV.
supporters here who feel like it is a question of whether the race is rigged. They feel the red mirage is the reality, and what comes next is potentially false, some funky business. That said, there's also supporters here who do understand how the election system, or understand better how the election system works, and they're watching a little bit more closely. And I'd say those are the ones who are a little bit more like, keeping their gunpowder dry and keeping a little bit more patient and waiting with a little bit of cautiousness.
That is NPR's Franco Ordonez. He has spent a whole lot of this past summer and fall traveling with the Trump campaign. He's still on it, speaking to us there from West Palm Beach, Florida. He is at Trump campaign headquarters, watching along with the rest of us as this night's election results roll in.
Arizona is one of the key states we're watching tonight, both at the presidential level and when it comes to control of the Senate. Ben Giles is in Arizona. Hey, Ben. Ben Giles, do we have you?
Hi, I'm here.
Hi, Ben. So let's start with this. President Biden picked up the state of Arizona in 2020, but Vice President Harris seems to be facing longer odds there. Help us unpack what's changed.
Well, remember, this state had the closest margin of any state in the 2020 presidential race. That leaves Democrats with very little room for error if they want to repeat a victory here with Harris. And I look to the Latino population. They now comprise nearly 3 in 10 voters here. It's the highest population of Latino voters among the 7 swing states. In 2020, they did break by 24 points for Joe Biden. That helped secure his narrow win. But we also saw some Latino voters shift towards Trump in that election, and that's a trend we're expected to see continue this year. So the key will be how many Latino voters actually turn out, and then knowing that, will the Democrats' margin of support with Latino voters still be an advantage or maybe a disadvantage this year?
She could be buoyed by a ballot measure there that would expand access to abortion in the state. Tell us what that's about.
Right, abortion is now legal in Arizona law up to 15 weeks, but voters here overwhelmingly supported putting a question on the ballot that would enshrine the right to an abortion in the state constitution and expand access to about 24 weeks, with exceptions beyond that that would account for health risks for mothers. Polling has shown the measure is overwhelmingly popular with voters, and Democrats here have been quick to remind voters of state and national Republican elected officials who've supported restricting or ending abortion access, or in Trump's case specifically, helping create the environment that makes this an issue at all in this swing state. And that included a moment earlier this year when the Arizona Supreme Court upheld a near total abortion ban in Arizona law that dated back to the 1860s. That law was narrowly repealed, but the moment proved motivating for voters.
Ben, we're going to have to leave it there. We'll circle back to you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, and I want to get back to Domenico Montanaro because we have a couple of more states with results. What do you know?
Yeah, a couple of big calls here. Ohio and Texas have been called for Donald Trump. Not surprising that he would win those 2 states, but Democrats were hoping to kind of keep it relatively close. Right now in Ohio, Trump has taken the lead and is up by 9 points. At one point, it looked a little bit closer than that. And in Texas, Trump is also leading by 9 points. And you have a couple of really key important Senate races in those states that haven't quite been called yet. But in Ohio, Bernie Moreno has now taken the lead over Sherrod Brown, the Democrat, 50-48. And in Texas, Ted Cruz looks fairly comfortable right now. He's up by 6 points, 52-46 over Colin Allred, the Democrat, who has spent just almost tenfold the amount of money on political ads, and Democrats were hoping to make that closer.
Okay, Domenico Montanaro with that news again. Ohio and Texas have been added to the Trump tally. You are listening to special coverage of this 2024 election.
Welcome back inside the studio, ACU TV or studio on the campus of Abilene Christian University. Thank you for joining us tonight. We've been having a great time so far. Thanks for staying along with us. As we continue to see live updates come in and polls are closing, Donald Trump at 177 electoral votes, Kamala Harris at 99 electoral votes as well. Before we jump into more live updates as more polls close, we want to send a big thank you to Joshua Varner and Leslie Kerrigan. They are abroad with ACU Study Abroad in Oxford, but they have a lot to bring to this election show as well. They pre-produced a package for us to watch about mail-in ballots and the way that students abroad are voting. Let's take a look.
We're here in Oxford talking with our fellow students about their experience voting in this election. In addition to the unique experience of voting in their first presidential election, students here also had to figure out how to vote from a different country.
I was kind of sad that I couldn't go and actually go to the polls and stuff and vote in person. But obviously I would rather be in Oxford than vote for 5 minutes. So I don't know. It's cool that I get to vote. I didn't feel like I got the full experience being here, but I'm still glad that I did it.
According to a survey taken of the students in Oxford, less than half voted in this election. Of the 23 students on the trip, 10 voted and 13 did not. One of our fellow students has some thoughts as to why this might be the case.
Requesting the ballot wasn't the easiest thing in the world. The website's from the early 2000s, and it's not the easiest thing in the world, and you can't tell if you are going to get one or not. I had to call and be like, hey, are you sending it? And I got confirmation there, but you had to put a little more effort into it to vote. I know people here that didn't vote because it was too strenuous and just wouldn't quite work out, but it turned out okay. There could be things that could be improved, but for mail-in voting from the UK, it's not too terrible.
While being abroad, students have had the opportunity to take a step back from the election and look at it from a more global perspective. Oxford Program Director Jacqueline Morrison has seen the influence of multiple elections on students firsthand.
I mean, it's all in your face. You all are on social media. You all have international access to news. So I'm sure you're still experiencing it, but maybe not having the barrage of the day-to-day American news hitting you. Maybe it feels like a relief.
Despite not being surrounded by as many people who are invested in the election, students are often asked about their thoughts and opinions by locals.
Hearing other people's perspectives from outside the U.S., because everywhere that I've been, at least one person has asked me about the election and what I thought about it and what was it like voting, and just hearing other people's points of view, watching from the outside in. And it was interesting seeing people seem like they also had a bit of, I guess, interest and concern about it. That's not something that I really expected, but it was interesting.
To answer the question of why people in the UK are so interested in the election, Morrison shares her thoughts after living in the UK for 21 years.
I think because America still plays a very important role on the world stage, and I'm choosing that quite carefully. I think we like to think that perhaps we have a bigger role than we should or do, and that's a whole separate conversation. But we do have a hugely important role, and so the choice of the leader of America is important to the whole world.
Once again, thank you, Joshua and Leslie, for that great story. We're excited to see how you guys are doing in Oxford once you get back after the semester. It's 2 a.m. there right now, so I'm sure you guys are asleep. Thank you so much for your insight. And that was a great look at how the election is viewed over the pond. I'm here with Sarah Trahan. She's done a lot of research and thought into what mail-in ballots have caused in this election and kind of the controversy that it's brought forth and what Americans are thinking about it. Also, we're going to dive into what that looks like moving forward. So, Sarah, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Daisy. It has been so lovely to see our friends over in Oxford, to hear about their experience voting, and I'm definitely missing my time studying abroad and living in that beautiful city. Even last fall semester when I was visiting, many UK citizens were sharing their concerns about this coming election and the state of our country, and that was so interesting to hear internationally.
Yeah, absolutely. So you have some of that background information of what that feels like to be abroad. How do you see that controversy here at play in this election, and maybe what people abroad might be thinking looking in?
I mean, first I want to talk about a bit of history. So like the first voter advocates were pushing voter opportunities for people who didn't have land and therefore weren't able to vote. And then for men of all races, and then finally pushing for women. And so what Democrats believe is that we've not yet eradicated all of that discrimination in the realm of voting, and that current voter laws are in place to prevent people of color and of lower income households from having the opportunity to vote. And because of this, in recent years, they've tried to push the passing of a couple Senate bills.
So we kind of talked about the Freedom to Vote Act and what that looks like within mail-in ballots coming into possible outcomes of tonight's election. Do you want to tell us more about that Freedom to Vote Act?
Right, absolutely. So I want to highlight some of the points about the Freedom to Vote Act, and that includes making Election Day a national holiday, allowing states at least 2 weeks of voting prior to Election Day, allowing voting by mail with no excuses needed, and a big thing is voter identification. This bill would push broader types of identification to be acceptable for voting.
Right, and so this election specifically, we've seen some controversy and some mixed emotions of what Americans are feeling about whether they're able to send in a mail-in ballot and how much identification that requires per state. It's not consistent among the U.S., and so different states require very minimal identification while other states are very strong on what kind of identification you must provide. So what do you think Americans are thinking about that?
Well, right now, Americans have been surveyed and polled, regardless of party affiliation, the majority of Americans support requiring all voters to show government-issued photo identification, proof of citizenship to vote, making Election Day a national holiday, in-person early voting opportunities, allowing convicted felons to vote after serving their sentences, and requiring paper ballot backups for electronic voting machines.
Right, and so with all those factors coming into play, it is causing a lot of controversy. Tell us about where that division is happening.
Right, so some of where parties are divided is that most Republicans are not in favor of allowing any voter to vote by mail if they want to, nor automatically registering eligible citizens to vote, nor allowing people to register to vote on election days at the polls. And so now the pushback from Republicans is due to concerns about voter integrity, and that is preventing voter fraud from occurring, because without proper identification, it's easy for underage or non-citizens to vote in an American election, and they believe there is more opportunity for corruption in the mailing process. They think that there should be viable reason for mailing in ballots, and they believe that voting should be a priority, including registering ahead of time, long before Election Day.
Right, and whenever it comes to mail-in ballots, candidates both Trump and Kamala have urged voters to get your mail-in ballots in quickly because it takes some time for those to arrive at the polling sites, which causes controversy on the integrity of that, whether all of the mail-in ballots will reach their final destination. Whenever you kind of look at both sides, whether you're Republican or a Democratic Party, the Republicans are more on the side of, well, we don't know if all the ballots are going to be true and going to arrive where they need to arrive at the correct site, representing the correct voter, while Democrats are looking at the fact of, well, everyone should be able to send in a mail-in ballot, which came a lot into play during COVID-19. Whenever a lot of people were stuck at home and could not get out to vote, mail-in ballots were seen like never before, which was part of the reason that the election was announced so late last year, a week or two after the election night. Hopefully we don't experience that this evening. But thank you so much, Sarah, for diving in about this topic with us tonight. I think it's a big topic that we've seen play out in this election, mail-in ballots. Hopefully they're being counted correctly this evening as polls continue to close. And now we're going to send it over to a quick break. We'll be right back here at ACU TV in the OR studio on Abilene Christian University. Thanks for tuning in.
practice in election administration. More than 40 states now allow some form of ballot processing before Election Day for absentee ballots. And for voters who, just to get a little bit in the weeds, because I do think it's helpful, when we talk about pre-processing absentee ballots, we're talking about things like signature verification, even something as simple as taking a ballot out of an envelope, getting it ready to go into the tabulator. All that stuff actually takes a lot of time when you're talking about tens of thousands or potentially millions of ballots, right? And so this really takes a lot of pressure off election officials who are also worried about, these millions of people who are voting on Election Day. The fact that they can do this work before Election Day takes a lot of pressure off.
Apply all this to Pennsylvania, a state where we are not expecting to figure out early what exactly happened there. Why? How do they do it there?
Exactly. It's basically a polar opposite. Election officials can't start any of that pre-processing work until on Election Day. And so they're basically administering an election in person for all of these voters while at the same time having to do this pre-processing security work on the absentee ballots. So what you can kind of see where this is going. Those absentee ballots then take longer to count because that work has to be done starting today. And then going forward, what we are expecting to see then is what is called, known as the blue shift. Basically, Democrats are more likely to vote by mail this election cycle, and because of that, those ballots are going to take longer to count. So what we may see is that a big wave of Democratic votes are counted later in the evening because those votes take longer to count.
One more just quick one to you, which is how things have changed this year as opposed to 2022, 2020, which of course was an extraordinary election for many reasons, but because of the pandemic, people were voting differently.
Yeah, generally election officials across the country have gotten faster, but I do think that that's what puts Pennsylvania as well as Wisconsin in this stark spotlight because election officials in both those states for 4 years, Mary Louise, were begging the state legislatures to change the rules to allow them to do this vote counting, or I should say vote processing before Election Day, but Republicans in both state legislatures would not budge, and so we're stuck in this position.
Miles Parks, thanks.
Thank you.
I now want to bring in Andy Shore, who's the mayor of Lansing, Michigan. He's joining us from a campaign watch party in Lansing for Democratic House candidate Curtis Hertel, who hopes to win the seat left open by Alyssa Slotkin, who's running for the Senate. Mayor Shore, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Just want to start by asking you to tell us what you're seeing there in Michigan and how your fellow Democrats are feeling about Vice President Harris's chances there at this point in the night.
Feeling really good. Really good. We saw incredibly high turnout throughout our city. I went out to a variety of poll sites, talked to a lot of folks, and we didn't know was the turnout going to be lower on Election Day? Were people just swapping early vote for Election Day vote? But our turnout was higher this year than it was 4 years ago, and this year we have the early vote where people could vote in person 9 days before. They could drop ballots off in the drop box. They could vote absentee. They had so many more options. And our votes were a lot higher, especially in higher Democratic areas. So I'm extremely excited, both for Curtis Hertel to be our next congressman and for Kamala Harris to win Lansing. And I think we're going to see that throughout Michigan and for her to win Michigan.
Control of Congress also runs through your state. You mentioned Curtis Hertel. I want to ask you about Alyssa Slotkin. Are you confident that she'll win that Senate seat?
I'm absolutely confident. She is. She's done everything right. She has been all over the place since she declared. She ran a great campaign. They were on TV, they were on radio, they were all over the state. Congresswoman Slotkin, she knows how to win tight races. She beat an incumbent here for Congress, an incumbent Republican. She knows how to win, and they've done everything right. I am confident that she's going to come out victorious, be our next U.S. Senator.
One issue that has loomed over Vice President Harris's campaign is the persistent divisions in the Democratic Party over the war in Gaza. Vice President Harris has faced interruptions from pro-Palestinian protesters at some events who take issue with the Biden administration position. Some have said that they won't support Harris on this issue. I know that she has been working to rally Arab American and Muslim support in your state. You were there on the ground. Tell me, how big of an issue could this be? What are you seeing and hearing?
It depends on where you are in Michigan. I mean, in Lansing, it's an issue just like it is everywhere else, but it's not like it is in Dearborn or some of the higher areas with Arab American populations. It's certainly something that they've addressed. I've seen her, 3 times now in the last 2 weeks, and she has mentioned it each time. She has said that that they certainly want to see the killing stop. They want to see. She wants to see a truce. She wants to see no more war. She also wants to see the hostages released. She is talking about getting solutions with that issue. She's talking about ensuring that that the Arab American population has a voice at the table, has a part at the table, as well as hearing from the folks who want to see the hostages released in the Jewish community. She's listening.
If I could just jump in here, do you think on this issue she's drawn enough of a distinction between herself and President Biden? One of the things we've heard from people is that Vice President Harris, she's still introducing herself to people. She's had a relatively short time that she's been running this campaign. On this issue, has she done enough to distinguish herself?
Yeah, I think so. I think she has. She has talked about what Kamala Harris is going to do, not what Joe Biden did, but what Kamala Harris is going to do. And I do think so. I think she's had good inroads, being able to get into the community, talk to some of the leaders, have good dialogue, hear from them, and understand that she's going to put them at the table. So I do think so. I think she is significantly talked about Kamala Harris, who's going to be the next president, and I do think she's been able to succeed in that.
We've been speaking with Andy Shore. He is the mayor of Lansing, Michigan. Mayor Shore, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Lots more to go tonight. It is still relatively early. Lots more analysis, results. You are listening to special coverage from NPR News.
NPR political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro is in the studio with us. Domenico, I want you to give us the big picture, but first, would you catch us up? We do have a couple of pieces of news to share, I believe, in Maryland and Nebraska. What have we got?
Well, in Nebraska, it splits its electoral votes by congressional district and statewide vote. The only other state to do that is Maine. Nebraska's third congressional district, which is not the one that we're looking to pay attention to, really, is the one that Trump has won here now, the Associated Press says. So we're still waiting on Nebraska's second congressional district, which if Harris wins that second congressional district in the Omaha area, then she would be able to win 270 electoral votes if she were to win Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, provided she wins everywhere else she's favored too. That's the most obvious path for her to be able to win. So without winning, though, the Nebraska second congressional district, we could be in a situation where there's the potential for a 269-269 tie, which nobody wants to see, I think, on anybody's side. So, but that's what we're looking at right now as far as where that is. But the race is really coming down still to those 7 states that have been toss-ups: Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Nevada. Nothing has been called in any of those 7 states yet. So there's a lot of enthusiasm on the right now because Donald Trump has 178 electoral votes. Kamala Harris has 99. Trump has certainly had leads and has leads in Georgia, North Carolina. So far in Georgia, Trump is up 52-47 with 77% of the vote in. In North Carolina, he's up 51-48 with 55% of the vote in. However, there is still vote that is out in some very populous areas. In Georgia in particular, if you look at a place like Gwinnett County, which is just outside of the Atlanta metro area, only 18% of the vote in there. So going to be a lot more vote that comes in from places like that could make this a very, very close final look. So,
and Gwinnett County, of course, one of those big Atlanta suburban counties that tends to lean blue.
That's right. And it didn't always lean blue. I mean, just a couple election cycles ago, it was a swing county. I mean, Georgia, for the first time this year, is now majority non-white. That was not the case, obviously, for a very long time when it was deep red. And that's why Democrats have been able to make states like Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, the Sun Belt states, more competitive because they are diversifying quickly, and they've been doing so. The Atlanta metro area is one of the fastest growing areas in the country, and a place like Gwinnett now is a place where Democrats can run up the score, just like in North Carolina, a place like Wake County, for example, where Raleigh is. Mm-hmm. That's a place where George W. Bush won in 2004 and now is 60+% likely for Kamala Harris.
All right, Domenico Montanaro there with the news that Trump has gained 1 additional electoral vote, winning Nebraska's 3rd congressional district, one of just 2 states that splits its electoral votes by congressional district. You're listening to live special coverage of the 2024 election from NPR News.
This is special election coverage of the 2024 general election from NPR and KACU. I'm Calvin Claiborne. KACU has spoken to voters at various polling locations today. Here's what they've found. Polls opened across Texas at 7 o'clock this morning. John Davis, who teaches in the College of Business at Hardin-Simmons, says he prefers to vote on Election Day for the tradition, and he stopped on his way to work to make sure his voice is heard in this election.
Not happy with either of the two presidential candidates, so I voted third party. In general, I'm for smaller government, so that influenced my choices up and down the ballot.
1,000 Taylor County voters cast ballots for third-party presidential candidates in the last election, out of about 55,000 total votes. Stay tuned to KACU throughout the night for local updates from Taylor County on the election.
Support for NPR's elections coverage comes from Hiscox, committed to helping small businesses protect their dreams. Quotes and information on customized insurance for specific risks are available at hiscox.com. Hiscox, business insurance experts.
You're listening to NPR's live special coverage of the 2024 presidential election. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Juana Summers. The Associated Press has called the race in more than 24 states. And so far, the tally for electoral votes is as follows. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump has 178 Electoral College votes, and Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris has 99. One candidate needs 270 votes to win. So far, none of the 7 swing states that we've been keeping an eye on have been called.
But we do have results from a few important congressional and gubernatorial races in North Carolina. Democrat Josh Stein won the state governor's race, defeating Republican Mark Robinson. In West Virginia, Governor Jim Justice has won the open U.S. Senate seat. That's the one that had been held by Senator Joe Manchin. Governor Justice was widely expected to win.
So far, we have gotten an in-depth look into the Electoral College with Case Kirby and Dr. Neil Coates, and we talked to Dr. Fowler. And we also looked at the use of fashion throughout political campaigns, recapped some key historical moments, and even had a feature from our own Oxford correspondents about mail-in ballots.
Yes, that's right. I think it was great to hear from our friends abroad, lots of great things that they had to say, and as well as contribute all the way from Oxford. Now, in this hour, we'll sit down with Sarah Trahan, and she will talk to Junior SGA Senator Langley Smith for a live interview over political discourse and remaining balanced throughout the election season, followed by an interview with Maddie Arrowwood, president of ACU Pro-Life. Then we'll wrap up with a sit-down interview with Dr. Phil Schubert to hear what it's like to be president of a university through a monumental election season. First, let's send it over to Daisy and Zion.
Thank you, Roman. Results are coming in. Former President Donald Trump is currently leading 178 to 99 in electoral votes, with the majority of the votes coming in southern states. In the blue wall states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, Trump has led in Wisconsin, which would contribute 10 electoral votes. However, Vice President Kamala Harris does have a lead in both Pennsylvania and Michigan, which would be a total of 34 electoral votes. This does not mean that Trump has completely lost. He could still win in the key swing states of Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina. He does have a lead with Georgia and North Carolina, but we are still waiting on official results.
Yes, and this is a close race to 270 electoral votes, and we'll keep bringing in the updates as they come in. We do have an interview with the university's own Vice President of ACU Democrats, Michaela Withrow, coming up, where she will provide an insight into their organization and how they're involved in this election.
Thanks for joining us, Michaela. Election season is here, and this is where your organization really thrives. Can you tell us how you guys have spread publicity about your organization as we come to election?
I think we really most did that by helping people register to vote.
Yeah.
and if they were already registered, seeing if they wanted to change to Taylor County or unless they just wanted to go home for like fall break to vote.
So ACU is generally known as more of a conservative campus. Can you tell me how you guys and your ideals have been accepted here and heard out?
I think most of the people that I've talked to throughout this entire semester, I was a little nervous because it's an election year and I was just it's always like a nerve-wracking thing. But most people that I've talked to are very open about hearing ideals and issues and policies that are on both sides. So the people that I've personally talked to have been super open into hearing what we have to say and just overall helping educate everyone on both sides.
So on the topic of ideals, what is the main concern that you have in our government right now that you want students to hear about?
I would probably say my biggest issue right now is like gun control, because I do have nephews who are like pretty young, and so obviously like that's my family. I'm always concerned about them. But looking at both of them, like both sides and stuff like that, I am like pretty content with things.
So as a red state in general, it's a little bit broader than on campus. How are you and your students planning on taking this outside of campus?
I think just letting our voices be heard, whether it be like online and who we support, and especially going out and voting.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Michaela. That was awesome. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for that interview. As we continue our show tonight, Zion's going to tell us what's coming up next.
Yeah, for sure. That was great to hear from the Democratic's voice on campus. Coming up next is Sarah Trahan. She has a live interview later today, and we're going to see how that goes. Coming up next, we'll send it to break first.
One of the things we know is Donald Trump basically is already all day is talking about cheating and talking about kind of seeding the ground to act like something's wrong if it takes a while to count these ballots. This is the rule in these states, and that's why especially Wisconsin and Pennsylvania take quite a while to count.
You just mentioned Senator Klobuchar, you chair the Rules Committee. I know you have released a report urging Americans to be on alert for efforts to undermine the election. Have you seen any of these efforts you warned about?
Well, clearly there was Russian messing around with these bomb threats that have been traced to them. Frightening, except thank God we haven't seen any active violence at this point, that we don't have every situation in yet, and the polls haven't closed in states that we still could see some problems in. I know
I'll
that
just inject, you're talking about some issues that we saw today in Georgia and a handful of other states, none of which all of the officials in those states have come out and said has not disrupted the election. Polls may stay open a tiny bit later. People are going to get to vote. No huge problems here. Go on.
Exactly. And I think it's really important people know that. And also, we've just taken more precautions. Also, with the Electoral Count Act that we passed, I'm just looking at a happy Tammy Baldwin there, too close to call, but at least she's up right now in Wisconsin. The issue is that we had make some changes to that archaic law because one person in each chamber could object and hold up the results in any state. Just see Bob Casey up too close to call. These are making me happy as I'm listening, talking to you.
You're multitasking. I can hear it. Can I jump in and ask you about one other thing? The so-called gender gap has been much discussed in this discussion as a force. I said you've been out on the road campaigning for Harrison Walls. You've obviously been out for your own campaign. What are you hearing on that front in terms of what issues are actually resonating? What issues are actually getting people to the polls today?
Sure. So I think there's two really big things with women. The first is obvious, and that is the freedom to make their own decisions about their health care. And, and it is not just younger women. It is grandmas. It is people who believe that women should have the rights that they've had since Roe v. Wade was placed into law. And they hate the horror of all of the patchwork of laws and the disastrous stories of women bleeding out. But there's something else going on, and that is that his vulgar language, his attack.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the studio. I'm here tonight with Langley Smith, a junior political science student at ACU and a junior class senator for the Student Government Association. Langley is also a Jack Popes Fellow with the Government and Criminal Justice Department, going above and beyond to learn about engaging in the public service sector. So Langley, thank you for being here tonight. You are an incredibly impressive student. It's my understanding that you just flew back to Abilene from Washington, D.C. last night. Will you tell us a little bit about your experience and what you were doing in our nation's capital?
Yeah, so I was presenting research at a conference that focuses on the Middle East. And my research focused on TikTok and the narratives that are portrayed around that app in different Middle Eastern countries. And I basically looked at the relationship between the government narrative that was being told and then media narratives and public pushback, and how that intersected into the policies that they were trying to implement in each of those countries. It was really interesting. It was fascinating to research.
That sounds fascinating, and you've done great research like this, and you're a political science student, but you've also shared with me that politics is important, but it's not the most important. So, it's been culturally emphasized in recent years especially, and I wanted you to expand on why you think it's important that our Americans remain fairly balanced when incorporating politics into conversation.
Yeah, I think it's really important that people recognize the importance of both sides of the stories. I think often it's really easy for us, especially in this polarized age, to forget that the other side's human. And so by finding a way to learn more about the other side is a great way to encourage and recognize that we're all humans, we're all God's children, we're all people who have a soul on this planet, and we're all just trying to do our best to thrive and survive in a very difficult environment. And one of the best ways to be able to stay informed is to really try to engage in political discourse. Political discourse is basically this idea of communicating and interpreting events and just things that happen in politics with people who are around you. Often it's easy for us to get really involved in discourse that sounds really similar to us or what our beliefs are, but it's really important for us to engage in conversation that we're not super used to, or that kind of push our comfortability boundaries, because it allows us to learn more about other people, about their experiences, and just allows us to connect on a deeper level, as well as allowing us to try to create a unity that's hard to find in this really polarized age.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of divisiveness, you've told me that you recently took a course regarding the American presidency and how it's just evolved and the increased divisiveness that's in the United States around election time. So I was just wondering, what are the highlights of what you learned in that course?
Yes. One of the most fascinating things that I learned is that the American presidency is just basically this giant balancing act. You find that there's kind of two different spheres that we talk about when talking about the American presidency. There's the head of state and there's the head of government. The head of government is what you traditionally think about with the president. They're leading the political agenda, talking to Congress, setting the budget, foreign affairs, domestic affairs, all of that type stuff falls into the government. The head of state is more like the ceremonial ritual type things, the feel-good things that people kind of talk about in pops up in the news every once in a while, like pardoning the turkey on Thanksgiving, you know, kind of those feel-good things that the president will do. In many countries, they're split. So for example, in the UK, the head of state is the royal family, and then the head of government is the prime minister. Here in the United States, we don't have that. We have one person who's doing it, and so it's a huge balancing act in trying to find a way to make sure that they are putting the emphasis where needed. I also learned a lot about how actually political elections have been pretty divisive since the beginning. Like you see with Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, those very beginning elections, there was still very divisive language that was being used. It just wasn't spread as quickly and not as many people could read. So it wasn't as pervasive as we see now with the access to social media. A lot more people could read, and just having quick access to internet makes it seem like it's way more polarized than it actually was.
Right, and so I want to draw back to what you were saying about political discourse, and I recognize that you have a passion in that field. So I wanted to ask about your experience moving from California to West Texas and the political differences there, how both of those places are recognized as extremes in the opposite directions.
Yes, I think it has taught me how important it is for you to start with listening. It can be so easy to make assumptions, and I find that in both locations there's assumptions, and most of them are incorrect about what the other side believes, about what they stand for, and so I think just encouraging conversation, it's really shown me how important conversation is in political discourse. I think it's also shown me how important it is to be able to recognize when the conversation needs to stop. Sometimes we can get so engaged into conversation and really trying to prove our point that we forget that the point of talking and communicating is to try to learn and try to connect. And it becomes more about defending my position or trying to argue against another position instead of just stopping, listening, beginning with a question, and truly trying to find a way to engage with the individual on a personal level and not on a level of I'm trying to prove a point.
Right, I think that that's all absolutely true, and I think that what's been common in recent years is that we've seen those barriers be put up in relationships with family and friends due to political differences. I was just wondering if you had some more advice for that conflict resolution and how to engage in those conversations.
Yeah, like I said, I think engaging with questions first, and not leading questions, but just questions that allow you to truly understand where they're coming from and the experiences that they have. I think also learning how to step out of a conversation if needed. I think one other thing that I have really learned how to do is to like pray through situations. And so often it is really easy for me to get defensive or get angry when I'm passionate about something, but learning how to pray through it, to meditate through it, to just truly think about what I'm gonna say next. I've also found myself in many cases like physically restraining myself from just saying something. Sometimes you'll see me like go like this. Normally it's I'm thinking. It's also, okay, hold on, like pause before you say something. So finding just things that work for you and finding ways to hold your tongue, learn how to engage in positive political discourse instead of negative, which is really easy to fall into.
Yeah, and I really like that you brought up not only how to engage in those conversations, but how to disengage and the tactics for that. And so I just wanted to thank you for your time and for all of the information that you've given us. Now we're going to throw it back to Ryder.
Thanks, Sarah. This just in, Donald Trump has won Missouri, putting him at 188 Electoral College votes to Kamala's 99. Last week, I had the chance to sit down with Dr. Neil Coates, the chair of the Political Science and Criminal Justice Department, to discuss the Middle East and the role of the region in this year's election. Head of the Political Science and Criminal Justice Department here at ACU, expert in Middle Eastern politics. Let's get right into it. How would you describe the state of the Middle East currently?
For people that say it's at war, no. The region is not at war. Israel certainly is at war with Hamas, is at war with Hezbollah, but it's had an undeclared war with Iran because Iran has been attacking Israel through its proxies for a number of years. there are 16 countries that make up the Middle East. And so as you think about that kind of a statement, is the Middle East at war? No. Is it a good time to go on a Holy Land tour? No. But the region as a whole, you can still fly in and out of everywhere from Doha and Dubai and Istanbul. And so the region is dealing with Hamas's attack, which involved Iran, last October 7th, a year plus ago. But that does not mean that the region doesn't have opportunities to still think about water desalination, to think about oil in the Mediterranean, to think about what Turkey should or should not be doing regarding Ukraine, Kurds, Palestinians, Persian Gulf trade, the Houthis at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. I mean, there's still plenty that's going on, even though we're kind of focused on Israel right now.
Yeah. So you had mentioned the attacks on October 7th, a little over a year ago. How has that impacted the size of the national conversation, specifically in the Middle East?
So by that question, do you mean countries' relations with Israel, or there's a lot of different ways we can go with this question?
I think what I'm trying to ask here is, how does that impact the election this year?
Here in the United States?
Yes.
Okay. Certainly in the Middle East, we all know there are not many elections there. But here in the United States, our influence in the Middle East is larger than almost any other country in the world. France is involved, Russia some, China some. But our relations with Saudi Arabia go back to the end of World War II. Our relations with Israel go back to the 1970s. Our interest in the Middle East is because of peace, but it's mainly because of oil. And then there are some religious interests that we have. And so this desire for there to not be a war and to allow trade to occur and to keep straits open, to keep airplanes flying, is certainly important in this election, but important even when there's not an election.
Yeah. So looking back at that 2016 election, again, Trump he won Michigan, surprisingly, which an historically blue state. We were talking before we started recording about battleground states and how Kamala needs to win some of those to gain traction. How Hillary took Michigan, states like Michigan, for granted. What can Kamala do to get a better chance in those battleground swing states?
So we all recognize that Vice President Harris has had a very short campaign. And that has the advantage to being the new person on the block and getting $1 billion worth of support. But a lot of that was unlocked because there were so many persons who were holding back money and effort because the president seems to be in a very precarious health state. And so when she stepped in without going through the primary process, it was just all hands on deck, and there was just a lot of kind of excitement, obviously. We all remember this. But because she's not had a lot of firsthand experience and not a lot was known about what she personally believed, and because she, to a great extent, while vice president, has sided with President Biden and allowing Israel to not have great amounts of weapons cut off or aid cut off during the attack against Hamas and Palestinians. So voters in certain parts of Michigan, Dearborn, etc., have really held back their support for Vice President Harris. And if you look at recent news articles, it's probably half of them either aren't going to vote for her, they don't know how they're going to vote. They are torn, and that will be making it a little bit more difficult for her to win Michigan.
Yeah, looking at it currently, in Michigan specifically, they are leaning slightly more to the right towards Trump. But that being said, that is all the questions I have. So thank you very much for doing this. And I hope you have a good election night.
Thank you. We're looking forward to this election night. I recognize we're taping this just a little while before that night. We're going to run it. But I would encourage all the persons who are watching to consider what the results do mean for the future of the Middle East.
Thank you very much.
What a great interview right here with Neil Coates. It's a great one. You talk about foreign policy. A lot of the times, folks here, we get distracted by that type of things because they're not happening right in front of us. But those things are important because they do affect us down the line.
That's right. Some live updates. Trump has just taken Utah, which is a really big deal, as well as Montana. So his electoral vote starting to climb. Also, more polls about to close here very shortly, with more information coming up very soon. With that, after this quick break, we have Roman and Ashley with a great update for us. Now let's go off to a break, hearing some NPR from KACU.
Pick up with this thread of chipping away at the margins. I know you have been tracking that with Kamala Harris chipping away at Republicans, the whole Republicans for Harris effort. How successful has that been? Has she managed to convince Republicans they should abandon their own party?
The short answer is we won't know for sure until this election is over, but reaching, uncertain, uncomfortable Republicans and conservative-leaning voters, people who voted for Trump in the past, that was a big part of the Harris campaign's strategy and even the Biden campaigns before Harris became the nominee. We know there's potential there. We know that, for example, former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley drew a lot of support, even in some of the primaries after she dropped out of the Republican primary. Take Pennsylvania, for example, a really important swing state, of course, that we're all watching closely tonight. President Biden won that state by about 80,000 votes last time. Nikki Haley got close to 160,000 votes in that primary, which, by the way, is a closed primary, so you'd have to switch party registration if you weren't already a Republican to vote in it. And she was already out of the race at that point. So this has been a big focus for both the Harris campaign and for several organizations allied with the Harris campaign who've been trying to make this pitch, like you heard Mara just describing, a unifying pitch. I was at an event a couple weeks ago outside of the Philadelphia area where the motto was country over party. Vice President Harris was calling on Republicans to put the country over the party, in her words, and vote for her.
Let's pull another voice into this conversation. Vivek Ramaswamy. He was a candidate in the Republican primary, ran against Donald Trump. After he dropped out, he promptly endorsed Trump and has since become a key voice in the Republican Party. You may recall his speech at the RNC, where he spoke directly to young voters and told them, you are going to be the generation that actually saves this country. Well, Vivek Ramaswamy joins me now. I'm told you're at the Trump campaign watch party in Florida. Welcome. How's it going there?
It's going well. I'm just stepped out of the dinner environment that has grown increasingly celebratory here at Mar-a-Lago. It's not over till it's over, but I think people are in very high spirits based on how the evening's unfolding so far, and I think for some good reason.
I've mentioned you've been a big supporter of Trump. You did criticize his campaign over the summer, and part of your critique was that you felt he wasn't focusing enough on economic policy, on immigration policy, back when Harris ascended to the top of the Democratic ticket. In your view, did the Trump-Vance campaign manage to right the ship and do so in time?
I do think so, absolutely. I viewed it more as a missed opportunity that we weren't going hard enough at our actual policy positions when she first came onto the scene, and that was understandable in retrospect. She was a new candidate. Nobody expected, at least from the mainstream view of it, nobody expected that the Democrats would actually replace Joe Biden. They said that was an impossibility. As that unfolded, it was really unclear what Kamala Harris's policy positions actually were. They went to, I think, great lengths to change or obfuscate some of her positions on fracking, on single-payer health care. But once she did start taking policy positions, I think that task became easier. And I think that's what's one of the things that's made this latter phase of the campaign, this final month, I think a lot more effective for Republicans, as Kamala Harris has done a lot of the work for the Republicans by laying out policy positions that I think were unpersuasive to many undecided voters. And I think it's a good thing for us to be able to decide our elections based on clear-eyed policy visions for the country.
Right through to the end of this campaign, Donald Trump has run a campaign fueled by anger, fueled by calls for vengeance, fueled by invitations to violence. Was this a good strategy?
Look, I respectfully disagree with the premise in one-sidedly putting that at the feet of Donald Trump. I mean, you have a Democratic Party, including Kamala Harris, that has repeatedly likened Donald Trump to Hitler, has made comparisons of that extreme and hyperbolic sort in an election where there have been not one but two assassination attempts on Donald Trump. And so,
and if I may interject, I will note that just on Sunday in Pennsylvania, Donald Trump said he wouldn't mind if someone has to shoot through the fake news. Just yesterday, he referred to Nancy Pelosi as evil, sick, crazy, and said, I won't say it, but a word that starts with me.
If I may.
Live update. This just in, Vice President Harris has won the state of Colorado. Huge step there for her. Not a swing state, but still an important state to win here. And despite that, Trump is still leading 198 to 99. He was leading Wisconsin, is going back and forth there, definitely somewhere to watch. And looked like there might have been a shift there, but now he's back to leading there. And Pennsylvania, interesting to see what's going to happen between those two. Obviously, if you're Vice President Harris, you're looking to lean on that blue wall between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Ashley, what have you seen so far?
Yeah, so Vice President Harris is still leading the state of Michigan. It's really interesting because the possibility of Trump winning not one but two of these blue wall states, along with the Sun Belt, could honestly change the entire trajectory of this election. But if there is another major shift, as we've seen it kind of go back and forth, he could take a different path if he wins the swing states of Georgia and North Carolina, along with Virginia and Nevada. He could then win a potential 281 electoral votes. So I have to say I'm a little shocked at how back and forth it's been. There's been a lot of surprises, especially with Virginia, which is my home state. Seeing that turn red as it has typically been blue has definitely been interesting. We'll see what happens officially, but right now it looks like Virginia is turning red, so that will definitely contribute to his electoral votes.
It absolutely will, and we're following this closely, and as Trump doesn't win Virginia and Nevada, his odds of winning will go down significantly, so two very important states there. And from here, we will go to an interview with Zion Webb and Marley Foster, the president of ACU Republicans.
Marley, thank you for talking to us today. Just getting right into it, what has the College of Republicans just been doing on campus recently leading up to the election?
That's a great question. So we have chapel every Fridays at 11, which is a really great time for members to come out and get an idea on what's going on in the world. We have open member discussions on differing views, because our members are not all extreme one way or the other. We have a lot of moderates and a lot of in-betweens. And so we get really great views and discussions on people's opinions, and it's a really eye-opening way to see how people see the world, and not everybody thinks the same way you do. We have chapels, we do voter registration. Every 9/11 we do a chapel, which is a really good way to open up membership. And we just try and get out there and spread the message of, hey, this is what our party believes. Hey, here's the best way we think we can bring Christ into our world and make the world a better place.
You talked about what your party believes, and there's a lot of policies on the line on both sides. So what, for you, is the most important policy in this election that us students should be looking at?
I think we should be looking at the economical standards and the immigration standards, because in the last 4 years, I know I've struggled to pay some bills and, to afford some things that 5 or 6 years ago wouldn't have bothered me at all. And I know the cost of living has gone up greatly. And I foresee if certain candidates win this election, the cost of living is only going to go up. And for college students who, we're all in school, we're working, 2-3 jobs, barely making minimum wage, it's going to get a lot harder for us. And things are going to be not a lot less easy to afford. And so we need to be on the lookout for the economic policies and the immigration policies as well. Fortunately for me, I can trace my history back to 1608. My maternal lineage came on the first boats over to America. So I know how important immigration is, but we have to be able to monitor that because it brings an influx of economical standards that we can't always keep up with because of the policies that come with immigration.
Nice, okay. And then we talked about a little bit earlier, you alluded to immigration. And for a lot of people, that brings up the divisiveness nature of Trump. Some folks believe the January 6th event. They believe some things that he says about his opponents and just things in general. What would you say to someone that said that Trump is just too divisive for America?
I would impartially agree with that. Trump is not a politician. He's an act. He is a face. He has really good policies. My dad was in the Army, and he got to work hand in hand with President Trump and got to see some of his really good policies and procedures. And Trump did a lot for our country. There were no wars started under Trump. But Trump also runs his mouth a lot, and that can lead to the divisiveness. He has really good policy and really good procedure, but when Trump starts to talk, he often goes off on tangents that become divisive. If we could get him to be less divisive, which we've started to see more now as the election becomes closer and closer, is he's become more modern on things like abortion and other key issues for that. If Trump would just dial back some of that and see that, hey, the more moderate side of things, that would be really great. Both candidates are extreme. 95% of America is moderate. So if you're center left, Trump might be your better candidate. If you're center right, Kamala's too far left. And so it's not just Trump. The issue is we do not have candidates that are not extreme. And that is where we need to find a better ground, is moderate candidates for the majority of America.
Can we get JMO out of the camera? Nothing. He just keeps like messing with the PTZ. Yeah. Thanks, Zion. It's really great to be able to hear from both our campus Democrats and our campus Republicans. I had a chance to sit down with Madeline Arrowwood, president of the ACU Pro-Life group here on campus. Let's take a listen to that interview. Studio, I'm Roman Raffelli, joined by Madeline Arrowhead, president of the ACU Pro-Life group. Madeline, why don't you just tell the audience at home a little bit about what your group does?
Yeah, hello. My name is Madeline, as you said, and I'm from ACU for Life. ACU for Life is the pro-life chapter on Abilene Christian University's campus. We do a variety of things, from educating people about the pro-life issue and the laws that we're trying to get passed, to the kind of the history of the pro-life movement, and then also ways we can be helpful to moms and dads here at ACU, and making abortion not only illegal but also unthinkable and unneedable. So we do things like we provide pregnant and parenting student scholarships. We provide resources to moms on campus. We do a lot of networking in between groups. So we're here both to serve and to educate the pro-life community.
Yeah, that's awesome. Diving into this election, what does your group kind of see, and what are your thoughts on each candidate's kind of choices on this?
This is a more complicated election for us than your normal presidential election. You know, for the last, I don't even know, 50 years or so, generally we have one ticket that we end up voting for, even if we don't ascribe to all their other policies. Usually we have one group that's affiliated with us, and this year that's a little different. So the current GOP candidate, Donald Trump, has taken some very pro-choice opinions in comparison to your typical Republican candidate. His wife, Melania Trump, put out a book recently in which she talked about her own personal feelings about a woman's right to choose, and he also has mentioned that he would be for abortion in cases of rape or incest, allowing exceptions, and he's made it very, very clear that he believes this is a state issue and not a national issue. And so obviously for some people in the pro-life group, that is very, very concerning. You know, this is the first time in a very long time that the GOP has not specifically had this is part of their party campaign platform. So that's a little bit unusual for us. And then on the flip side, obviously Kamala Harris is radically pro-choice in every way you can possibly think of, all the way up through the third trimester. There's been a lot of controversy around her beliefs on that, about parental consent, about abortions after a child has already been born. So this is a concerning election for us. We don't really like the way we see the country headed right now. 60 to 70% of American voters are of the opinion that abortion is a right that women should have. And so we do not like the way that the world is trending on that. I would encourage people to vote their conscience, to examine the candidates, to think about them as whole people. Certainly Donald Trump is more pro-life than Kamala Harris, and you can say with a high degree of certainty. but this is not the ideal candidate for either. And in terms of state by state, I mean, you really just have to know your stuff, do your homework, read about candidates. But it is an unusual election in that regard.
Yeah, you began to touch on it there. A lot of voters are very typically one issue specific. What can you say about that kind of situation, especially with Christians in this election?
Yeah, I mean, as Christians, we have an even higher moral responsibility to make sure that we are protecting life and thinking life first when we are voting. This is an election where I think that definitely comes into play. Pray, think, do your homework, but Christians certainly have a high moral responsibility to make sure that we are protecting life. And so I encourage people to consider that first and foremost when they're voting in this election cycle. And other issues, of course, there's many important things on the ballot, but I would really encourage people to vote life first. And there are a great and growing number of people who do vote life first, myself included, and other officers who are very concerned and who are very worried. Like, what do we do now that we don't have a clear pro-life candidate anymore?
Yeah. What would you say that, I mean, this is typically a pretty soft-spoken topic in terms of just, it's kind of gentler on some people, but what would you say are the benefits of you guys spreading awareness and talking about it more, especially within a Christian campus?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a hard issue. This is a hard issue, and it is an issue that is not treated with the empathy and the consideration that it conserves on both sides of the aisle, and that is certainly something ACU for Life is working to improve the discourse around. We are not sympathetic enough, kind enough, gentle enough when we're discussing this issue, and that makes it very awkward for people, because a lot of people may agree with us or agree mostly with us, but they're worried about sounding crazy or mean or overly difficult to deal with, and that is fair. I do not want people to assume that they're going to be hurting women or judging women if they agree with us on this. So it's certainly a difficult and challenging issue to talk about, but it is an important issue to talk about. So despite the stigma, despite the discomfort, despite the awkwardness, I encourage people to continue to have those conversations, because they are essential to continuing good political discourse in this country, even when it is uncomfortable. And I would say that this does not have to be the monster that everybody considers to talk about. We come into politics in this country with a very biased, very dark approach right now, and I would like to see us be able to have these conversations openly and freely. I would like to encourage people on both sides of the aisle to treat the other with kindness and respect, and to really consider the facts and not just your feelings about all the other issues, because it can be easy to just vote with one party, vote with one platform, just click the button and that's the end of that. But that is not always a productive thing to do, and it's important to analyze the issue with its worth and not be afraid for people to judge you or consider I don't want to talk to that person anymore. This is really important. This is not money. This is life or death. This is it's an incredibly important issue. So I encourage conservatives to have empathy and consideration. I encourage liberals to hear us out, and I conserve everybody in between to talk about this and to think about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sitting down and sharing your insight with us. We really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
We appreciate Madeline and ACU time and efforts to sit down with us and talk about their group. This breaking news, Vice President Harris has won Washington, D.C., giving her a good edge here so far, and we will take another break, and when we come back, another segment.
I had the opportunity to sit down with Dr. Phil Schubert, the president of Abilene Christian University, about the political climate on campus and how Christians should thoughtfully and faithfully navigate the election process. This conversation highlights the values that should guide us during this pivotal time, as well as how to be both respectful and disagree at the same time. Thank you, Dr. Schubert, for meeting us today. Just getting right into it, we talk about the political climate on campus. How would you describe that currently?
Well, I think that one of the things we hope for at ACU is that this will be a place that models what it looks like to have great, thoughtful discussions across various viewpoints, but always in a way that's respectful and kind. I think that as Christians, we recognize that we're not always going to agree with the person across the table, but we always have a responsibility to treat them with kindness and respect. And I think for the most part, we do a great job of that here at ACU. I think that's modeled by our community really well.
And then we talk about the political climate right now, and it's very polarizing. On campus, how do we maintain the Christian environment, but also be open to different political opinions?
Yeah, that's always a good question. So I think that what we typically see on the news or social media in a political season doesn't reflect the way we would want to work on our campus with each other, right? So to your point, I think things are very polarized right now. And often we see all kinds of bad behavior that are associated with how people with two different and disparate opinions treat one another. I think one of the things that's helpful is to recognize that on one hand you have what you believe, and on another hand you have how you act because of what you believe, especially as it relates to someone else. And so I think the recognition that our job is not to try to get everyone to agree with us, right? The goal is never to try to get uniformity of agreement on a particular issue, but the goal is always to be able to have good, respectful, caring conversation with whoever's sitting across the table from me. So I think sometimes separating the two, the what do I believe over here, and then recognizing how important it is to ask the question, with knowing what I believe, how do then I treat other people who believe differently? And I think if we're conscious about that responsibility that's separate and apart from what we believe, to be really intentional with how we treat each other, even when we disagree, we're going to tend to make the right decision.
Solid. And then you kind of talked about what you believe. You as president, are there any limitations that you have in your political views or what you can do politically just in general?
You know, as a nonprofit organization, the university, this is not me personally, but the university cannot take a political position, meaning we can't support per se political candidates or promote their campaigns. As individuals, we have the freedom and the right, and in many cases I think the responsibility to participate in the political process by casting our vote and being part of the discernment process to figure out what do we believe is best. So you know, what I try to do is be thoughtful. You're rarely going to hear me publicly expressing my political opinion. Because I don't know that that's helpful. I don't know that my role is not to try to, again, convince people to believe a certain thing, but you're going to hear me a whole lot more encouraging people to lean into conversations about the political process, about the social landscape that we all live within, and to be thoughtful about how to navigate that for yourself. I think one of the things you try to do as a university is you instill in young people the habits of mind that cause them to ask questions, to inquire, to consider, to form their own opinions about the things that matter most in life, and that's true of the political process. And so I think we do a disservice to the students here if we try to give them a political opinion and try to convince them. Instead, we ought to be really encouraging them to take the journey to discover, discern on their own, and form their own opinions. And I think, again, we do that well here.
Specifically, what would be your advice if you're talking to a student new to voting, or more specifically, just about how they prepare themselves to vote? What would you say to them?
Well, the first thing I would say is I'm pretty sure there are Democrats and Republicans in heaven. And I think we all ought to realize that. There's not one party that has monopoly on the gates of heaven. And so there are good people on both sides. I do think, I also heard someone say once, we always need to be really careful to not choose our church, and I'm using church as a broad metaphor here, based on our politics, right? But we ought to choose our politics based on our faith, right? Our faith needs to always be that paramount, essential thing that's the foundation that guides everything that we do, and that's what we teach at ACU. An education grounded in our faith, and that then extends its influence to all the decisions we make in life, including the political arena. And so my advice is to trust your instincts of being people of faith, that asking the questions in any arena, especially politics, what is my faith, where does it cause me to lean on this position? I don't think they're mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. Those that think, hey, we're gonna have a completely separate domain over here that we're gonna talk about things that are related to our faith, and that's not gonna cross over with our politics. I don't think that's a tenable position to hold at all. And so instead, I think start with the faith tenets, the things you believe to be true about Scripture and the life and teachings of Jesus, that then inform how we treat one another, how we think about leadership and influence and laws and policies, and ultimately that's going to inform the political positions that we hold.
Well, great. Thank you for your insights, sir. I appreciate
Thank you, Zion.
Today. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you to Dr. Schubert, who spent time to take that interview with us for this show. We're going to take a look at a live update going on. More than half of the states across the country have closed their polls as voters wait to see whether Donald Trump or Kamala Harris will win this election. Polls in California, Oregon, Washington, and Idaho still waiting on those to close over on the western side of the country. Polls in Hawaii and Alaska will be the last to close this evening. As those start to close here shortly, we'll be taking a look and updating you. Donald Trump right now with 198 electoral votes and Kamala Harris with 112 electoral votes. For now, we're going to send it over to Alexis Adam to hear more about what each candidate needs.
Thank you so much, Daisy. Welcome everybody to the Road to 270, where every minute counts and every state matters as we track in real time the 2024 presidential race to the White House. This is where you'll see exactly what your candidate can do to secure the keys to the Oval Office. Tonight, we're looking at the two key pathways to victory, one that could lead Vice President Kamala Harris to a historic win, and one that might hand former President Donald Trump his return to power. We'll break down these scenarios as the numbers come in. Our first map, the Sun Belt path, is Donald Trump's Republican Party's best chance at victory. If Trump can win over swing states Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina, leaving Michigan, Wisconsin, and Nevada to Vice President Harris, the outcome is 281 votes for Trump and 257 for Harris. Trump is currently favored in Arizona, Georgia, and North Carolina, three states that have tended to vote Republican since the 1980s. If Trump wins those, he would only have to take one of the blue wall states, either Michigan, Pennsylvania, or Wisconsin, to reach 270. Current polling suggests his best bet is Pennsylvania. If he pulls this out, he could survive losing Arizona and still win the election. Next, we're taking you over to the blue wall standing map, where Vice President Kamala Harris holds a thin lead of 270 electoral votes to Donald Trump's 268. But to lock in this path, she'll need to secure Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the three pivotal states that form her blue wall. On the other side, Trump has his sights on Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and Nevada, all of which he'll need to pull off a win. Right now, Harris is favored in Michigan, where her early numbers show she's holding a slight edge. However, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin are proving to be more challenging. She's trailing in both states, where Trump has ramped up his efforts. Historically, all three of these states have been toss-ups. In 2016, they swung red, handing Trump a surprising victory, only to flip blue in 2020 and help secure Biden's path to the presidency. These stakes couldn't be higher this year, as both candidates fight to hold ground in these battleground states. So with two distinct paths to the presidency on the line, the stage is set for an intense showdown. Trump's focus on the Sun Belt states could deliver him the White House, while Harris is fighting to keep her blue wall standing. With each state's fate up in the air, every vote is vital. And tonight, history hangs in the balance. I'm Alexis Adams, and that's the latest from the Road to 270. Now, let's kick it over to Zion in the control room.
Thank you, Alexis. Obviously, we talked about this earlier, alluding to the fact that these folks in here, they're doing an amazing job. They're doing all the hard work for us. So we're going to talk to these guys, starting with Dr. Pybus, the great guy, the chair of our department. Dr. Pybus, how important is it for us to cover hard things like this that bring up emotion, these hard news in politics?
Yeah, well, we're looking at people who are voting across the country, and these people are voting based on information that they have. And the information that they have is information that we as journalists should be providing to them. So we want people to make informed decisions. Without informed decision making, we can't have a strong democracy, a strong constitutional republic.
Thank you, Dr. Pybus. And then moving over here just a little bit to the driver of the ship, Hutton Harris. How are you doing, man?
Doing good, man. Hey, say hi, Mom. How you doing?
Great. So we're talking about how great of an experience this is for students coming in. How crazy is this just as an idea for folks to be able to be working for ACU TV?
Yeah, so we did this 4 years ago. And it was just during COVID, right? So we didn't have any sports. We didn't have anything to do except for plan this. So I've been really impressed that you guys have done both class and sports. We have like 10 games this week, and now we're doing this tonight. So again, very impressive that you guys could pull this off. So I'm very proud.
Yeah, thank you, Hutton. And then lastly, we'll talk to Paige here in the front. Paige, obviously, wow, what a start to your freshman year. You're doing a lot here. Walk me through the experience being at ACU TV, being able to do things like this, but also cover live broadcasts on ESPN+.
It's been such a good experience. Coming to a small D1 school has just been like the best thing possible for me and like all the other freshmen here. You get opportunities that you wouldn't get at a bigger D1 school just because not a lot of schools have like student run broadcasts, and it's just such a great opportunity to be able to get.
Thank you, Paige. And thank you guys for tuning in. We're going towards our third hour of this broadcast, but first we'll send it to a quick break.
On the ballot this year might be, up for grabs.
We
perhaps.
might see a Democrat
for
elected.
Democrats?
Yeah.
Not so much. Has not been the case so far. All three incumbents leading their Democratic challengers by about 15 percentage points.
And this is with anywhere between 2/3 of the vote and roughly 3/4 of the vote tallied.
That's correct. Most counties reporting about 60 to 70%, somewhere in that neighborhood.
Yeah. Blaze, what do you make of this? What sort of narrative seems to be shaping up tonight? It seems as if, just looking at the presidential tallies here, that would seem to suggest that Texas, if anything, even with these additional voters that we've seen over the past, certainly building up over the past 4 years, may be turning a little bit more conservative. Is that your read or no?
That's exactly how I'm seeing it. I think all the polls showed that Trump, 8 points and 10 points, even for Cruz's race, which was, 3 or 4 points, and they have nearly double that right now.
Yeah, that was back in 2018 when Beto O'Rourke ran against Cruz. It was a much tighter victory margin there, and as I understand it, Cruz is indeed making some kind of comment before his supporters. We would assume that he is going to, if not declare the race is his, come out and at least encourage his supporters to, don't need to encourage them very hard, to keep the faith. Of course, this and many other stories developing on this election night, and Michael Marks continues to track votes in major races across the Lone Star State. You're listening to continuing live coverage of election night in Texas from the Texas Standard, the Texas Newsroom, and our partners across the Lone Star State. We'll have another update at 10:35 p.m. Central, 9:35 Mountain Time. Keep it here.
Their dreams. Quotes and information on customized insurance for specific risks are available at hiscox.com. Hiscox, business insurance experts.
This is NPR's live special coverage of the 2024 presidential election. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Juana Summers. If you're just joining us, polls have closed this hour in Montana, Utah, and Nevada. That means polls have now closed in all 7 key swing states we've been tracking throughout this contest. No race calls.
Shrine here with Jameson. We're here to give you some more live updates as we are seeing the election almost come to kind of a middle point. It's 9:41 in the central time zone, meaning that it's 10:41 out east, and we're still waiting on polls to close out west. Jameson, tell us what we're kind of seeing right now.
Well, Daisy, we're kind of seeing a mirror image to the 2020 election where we saw Donald Trump jump out way ahead early, like we're seeing now. But Kamala Harris, like you mentioned, those blue states on the western part of the U.S., still waiting for those to come in. We mentioned that Donald Trump did take Texas, which gives him 40 electoral points, but the Democratic Party has historically been known to win California, and those polls on the East Coast that have closed up, still waiting on those on the West to close.
That's right, and we have just learned that Donald Trump has taken Iowa, so that's in addition to the information that we've just received. Donald Trump at 210 electoral votes, Kamala Harris at 112. That's exactly right. We're kind of seeing a mirror of previous elections because out east, there's some more red states just traditionally, and then out west, you have some more blue states, which just causes kind of a delay in what we might need to understand as the night continues to go on. Before we head into more segments, let's send it right over to Zion Webb for more.
Wow. Thanks, guys. Coming up, we have an interview with Michaela Clayton. She talks about the history of politics. Let's tune in and hear what she has to say.
Fabrizio, I want to thank you for meeting with me today to answer some of my questions. My first question is, how have changes in political party systems affected the nature of elections?
At one time, the wealthiest people in this country used to be members of the Republican Party, but that's no longer the case. And the Republican Party now, because of its focus on culture and life issues, it's now much more a party of people who don't have college degrees, a party of people who are blue-collar workers. The Democratic Party has also reversed from what it once was, where it once was the party of the working class, the working man. You go back to FDR, for example, all through the 1950s, 1960s, if you were a member of a labor union, you were automatically a Democrat. And that has switched now, and the Democratic Party now has membership made up largely of people who are college educated and people who are wealthy. And so that all has changed. And so, you know, in answer to your question, if you go back in time, farmers used to be solidly Democratic. Now they're solidly Republican. So I'm not sure what else to say about it without going into great detail. But the Republican Party at one time was the party of reformers. Think back to Teddy Roosevelt and the progressive era. Those were Republicans who were saying we need to change the system. Then you think about change in the 1950s and the 1960s, and you've got Democrats who are pushing change. Republicans are saying they're conservative. Now you look at the current election, and lo and behold, it's the Republicans who are coming across as the party of change.
Why would they have switched, the Republicans and Democrats?
That's really interesting, and I'm not sure there is one thing you can point to, but I would look at leadership, who the candidates are, and who they attract. So Donald Trump, an incredibly wealthy man, has made a concerted effort to speak to people who are affected greatly by the economic crisis going back to the Great Recession in 2008. So leadership really drove that. policies also can drive parties in certain directions. You think about what some would call the woke agenda. That was driven by really well-educated, graduate level, that sort of thing, members of the Democratic Party who said, we need to move in this direction. So they're the ones who drove that issue. And when you drive certain issues, you're going to attract certain kinds of people to them. And so that's what's going on. You have, I'm going to make it simplistic, and I hate to do that, but you have politicians who are by nature opportunistic. And they look at the political landscape and they go, what can I do to move voters in my direction? What can I do to attain political power? What issues can I grab onto? And that's what we've seen all through American history. Politicians grabbing issues, saying, hey, this is important. And lo and behold, voters move with them.
How do you think the advancement of technology has changed elections?
One of the biggest campaign expenditures for George Washington's campaign was whiskey, because he would buy people drinks. So that was technology in that time. I would argue that the tool has changed, but the use of technology, however you want to define it, has been a constant all through the campaign. Politicians look and they go, how can I reach this voter? What's it going to take to reach this voter? I'll buy him a drink. How am I going to reach a voter today? I'm going to send him a text message. That's what we got. In the middle, there was radio, there was TV. Now we're in the internet age.
Speaking of the history of elections, what lessons can we learn from previous elections?
The 2016 election and the 2020 election both taught us the dangers of adhering too closely to public opinion polls. They show trends, they give us an idea of where voters are, but in the end, until the votes are counted, you really can't be sure of what's going to happen. I think that we always need to be watchful of what campaigns are doing so that they try to adhere to some semblance of the truth.
That's all the questions I have today, so I really appreciate you sitting down and giving me your insight about elections and history.
Great job, Michaela. We love hearing about the history. Coming up in our final hour, we have a call-in with Dr. Doug Mendenhall. After that, we have a watch party cam going on. And then lastly, a live interview with Tamil Agal. Thank you guys for listening. Here we go to Michaela on the screen.
Thank you for that, Zion. So as you can see here, we have a chart that has organized different media outlets according to their biases and reliability. So here at this chart, okay, at the bottom we have graphs. At the bottom is inaccurate and fabricated information, and then as we go up, we have some information that contains misleading info and different media sources. And then near the top, we have sources that contain thorough fact reporting and fact-dense analysis. Then at the very left here, we have sources that lean more towards the left or Democrat, and then towards the middle, we have the non-biased sources, and all the way to the right, we have extreme right and Republican sources. This chart is helpful for those who are looking to become informed about elections and need clarity on the political leanings of different sources, as well as helping consumers make informed decisions about which outlets to trust for factual information. So here in the middle, going horizontally, you can see that these sources contain some opinions. And this is important to remember as you're doing your research on the elections. It can be hard to decipher opinions and facts in the media sometimes, so this is a helpful way to find out where a media outlet stands. Some notable sources to point out on this chart Number one, the Pew Research Center here at the top. As we can see, we also have ABC, CBS, and Forbes, which are pretty close to standing in the middle, and they have a mix of fact reporting and simple fact reporting. Then we also have over near towards the left, we have Wired and TMZ a little bit more in the middle as well. And then over towards the right, but near the top, we have Fox News, The Wall Street Journal, Investors Business Daily, and Fox Business a little more towards the right, but lower down. And then we have the Daily Wire and the New York Post and Daily Mail, which are a little bit more skewing towards the right, but still factual and in that analysis category. And so this is the media bias chart that we have, and this is a different chart, but that is all, and we're going to take it to Dr. Doug Mendenhall, who's going to tell us more about media bias.
Thank you, Michaela. I am currently on the phone with Dr. Doug Mendenhall, Associate Professor in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communication. Dr. Mendenhall, thank you so much for joining us on this election night. You have a lot of knowledge and experience teaching about media as a whole, as well as media bias. So to start off, could you just explain what the primary causes of media biases are?
Sure, Ashley, and thanks for having me. Going back to when I started teaching college in 2008, things were shifting, but I would still have told my students then that some media bias is inevitable. Everybody on the planet is biased to some extent. But most reputable media companies were trying to fight against that and had inside rules and forces to keep their reporting mostly objective most of the time. So the original driver of media bias was just having human beings involved in gathering news, because it's not easy, as you know. And just like you, Ashley, and me, and every person in the audience, those human beings have their personal biases, their preconceptions, prejudices, mostly based on their past experiences, their environment, trends they were seeing or thought they saw. And the journalism industry then talked a lot about trying to root out these biases, but that was always kind of a holy grail that you were never going to actually achieve 100%. Since then, we have much bigger issues of actual media bias today for a couple of reasons. This rise in bias really ramped up before the turn of the century, when Fox News was the first major company to maintain openly a certain political perspective as a new way to package and market the news and attract a really devoted audience, instead of the old-fashioned kind of nothing but the facts model that came before cable TV. CNN was earlier. It was founded in 1980, but its original business model was more all news all the time, although over the years it has also added more opinion to its content, whereas Fox started right off with a strategy of lots of opinion shows, which weren't always labeled that way. So CNN, and especially Fox, definitely led us into this new era where you could choose for the first time what political perspective you wanted your news channel to have, and they would offer you plenty of opinions that agreed with what your views were. And sometimes from watching, you couldn't quite tell if you were listening to factual news or maybe just some blowhard with strong opinions. And then the other big factor in this was the birth of the internet. By the time social media platforms had crept into most of our lives, say 12, 15 years ago, we were used to the idea of spending hours a week or even hours a day controlled by social media algorithms that serve up this endless stream of information that made you happy, that pushed all the right buttons to keep you there on the site, watching the stream, and either disliking or liking all these posts, which the algorithm used to decide what content to put in front of you next to keep you going. And I would say that has led to our biggest bias problem of it all, which is not really media bias, but the bias of all the human beings who make up the American public, caused by a steady exclusive diet of taking in information that matches their existing beliefs, their existing personal biases, instead of really seeking out the objective truth. Again, I'm not saying that today's news media is blameless, but I do think it's the public and not the news media that we should be the most worried about.
Yeah, so could you go more into kind of the differences between misinformation and disinformation and how that influences the public opinion?
Okay, sounds like the same thing, right? And you'll hear different people talk about this with different labels. But I think the main point is to understand that there are two different things happening here. The way I use the words, misinformation is basically lousy information. A news story that because of sloppiness or lack of experience or laziness or whatever supplies you with bad info. Like if you get an invitation to a party and you show up and you find out the party was yesterday. That's misinformation. And you're going to be ticked off at the person who sent out the invitations with the wrong date, even though they didn't do that on purpose. At least you hope they didn't. Disinformation is more serious. It is the product of somebody actively, knowingly passing off lies as truth and trying to get those lies into the news media or social media maybe, so that the audience ends up confused and eventually can't tell what's real and what's made up. Think about whether you've heard people say something like that during this election cycle. Disinformation is a weapon, and it has been used effectively for decades against the United States by Russia and other countries, including in this current election cycle. Disinformation can also come in handy for, say, an American politician who wants to make up an alternative picture of what our city or our state or our nation is really like, as a way to push voters towards supporting that politician as being the solution to those made-up issues, if that makes sense. And I think the scariest part of all this is that with the public already locked into accepting or rejecting the truth of a news story or a social media post based on whether it agrees with their existing beliefs, rather than if it is backed up by fact and by research, in that environment, disinformation is a very effective tool to confuse and divide us.
Well, Dr. Mendenhall, I know we could chat about this all day, but I just want to thank you for joining us really quickly. And now we're going to go into a quick break before we go back to Daisy and Zion with a live update at the desk.
We are back.
Welcome back inside the ACU TV or studio. We are going to give you guys a quick update. Donald Trump is at 210. Kamala is at 113. Case, what have you seen recently on the Electoral College map?
Yeah, so on the Electoral College map, it's still just kind of looking like Pennsylvania is going to be another, deciding battleground state. A lot like the 2020 election where it was very much a deciding battleground state. And then again, we kind of have that red upper wall where we have Minnesota and Wisconsin and Michigan. And kind of depending on how those turn, especially throughout the night as we get more reporting, especially because Minnesota is only at 9% currently. We'll start to see kind of how this election is going to end up turning out based on how those three deciding states will turn. And then, of course, some of the states on the western side, polls won't really be closing until a lot later for those states, so we won't really know, although we can assume that some of those states will be turning blue. And yeah, that's kind of it with a general Electoral College update.
What is it going to take for Kamala to kind of crawl back some of those Electoral College votes? You mentioned the West, how a lot of those voting stations are not going to close for another few hours. What states do you think she has a good chance to take in order to get some ground back against Trump?
Well, I really think, this has kind of been a thing for years, but obviously California is a pretty good given one. And a lot of these places with very, densely populated bigger cities. I think Washington could be a pretty obvious one. Oregon as well. Nevada usually has some red, but overall the county with Las Vegas ends up making it turn blue with its heavy population. So I think with that she can really come crawling back, and just just with those western states. But again, those polls will not close until later. But that will really start boosting her up, and then it will really become a push to 270. It'll really become neck and neck as to who will win this election, and we might not even find out until early in the morning.
Yeah. So this just in right now, Kamala actually has just taken California, earning her 54 Electoral College votes. I'm not sure what the number is right now, stacking up against Trump, but a California win for Kamala, that's pretty big.
And my screen is also saying Washington as well. If this is accurate, California and Washington. Breaking. Wow. Yes, breaking. If this is accurate, so California and Washington bumps Kamala Harris up to 179 with Trump at 214. So just like we were just talking about, that kind of crawling back with those western states is really going to put this neck and neck for 270.
Yeah.
But we'll find out as the night goes on.
It looks like she's closing the gap. But in other news, some pretty monumental history here. Sarah McLaughlin has become the first transgender person to win a seat in Congress in the state of Delaware. There's an open Delaware seat, and she's become the first transgender person in Congress. That's pretty monumental stuff, and just another monumental moment in this pretty historic night.
Yes, lots of historic stuff happening tonight. We're going to see a lot of changes in seats, and obviously, depending on how this plays out, we've kind of talked earlier about how history might repeat itself with Grover Cleveland, and if Trump wins, there's history being played where it's him coming back, and then if Kamala wins, then it's going to be the first female president. So.
All right, that's it from us. We're going to throw it to Paige now for some man on the street interviews.
Thanks, guys. Last week, we were on ACU's campus and asked students about their perception of the election and politics through social media. I also asked them how social media content and celebrity endorsements could impact Gen Z voters specifically. While we were unsure of how many students would be willing to speak up about politics, we were able to get a lot of good insight from a student's perspective. Let's take a look at what these students had to say.
I'm from Lubbock, Texas. Majors in nursing, and I'm a freshman.
Do you think that the celebrity endorsements, for the presidential candidates, has an effect on how they vote?
Yes, because anything that celebrities post, people tend to follow because they want to lead in their footsteps, so it affects it a lot.
Thank you so much.
I'm Kevin Leach. I'm a senior nursing major.
What effect do you think the presidential candidates having social media has on how Gen Zers vote?
I definitely think that political candidates who use social media definitely appeal to Gen Zers specifically, because that's definitely a big thing that Gen Zers use is social media. I think it's an easy way for them to kind of appeal to that generation.
Hi, my name is Beth Allison. I'm a social work major and a freshman from Belleville, Texas.
Do you think the celebrity endorsements for the presidential candidates has an effect on how they vote?
Yes, I think it has a huge impact, especially with celebrities that have a huge platform like Taylor Swift or Billie Eilish.
Hi, my name is Celeste Trumbla, and I'm a senior psychology major here.
Do you think that the presidential candidates having social media has an effect on how Gen Z is voting and like the fact that they are voting?
I think it really does, and also it has like influenced the way I voted as well, like finding out new information, and like there's certain videos that you see on TikTok, Instagram, and other social medias that influence the way you vote, I would say.
My name is Caleb Onzi, and I'm a junior kinesiology pre-PA major, and I'm from Lubbock. Well, yeah, I'm from Lubbock.
How do you think the celebrity endorsements the candidates have been receiving affects how the Gen Zers have been voting?
I mean, I think that if you have one celebrity that you're really in love with and just down horrendous for, and you see them lean one way, you're obviously might sway in whatever decision they're making just because you're just down bad.
My name is Rihanna. I'm a biology major from Houston, Texas.
How do you think the presidential candidates having social media affects the number of Gen Zers that are voting?
I think the more involved they are on social media, because obviously a lot of people in Gen Z are on social media, so it's they're not watching the news or debates, and so by them being on social media, they're actually saying their opinions. Other times they kind of do too much on social media, and we see that and we're we don't really take them seriously too. So
Hi.
Paige. I'm glad we got to hear from such a diverse group of students. As we heard in the interviews, the political candidates have been targeting younger voters through the increased use of social media and celebrity endorsements with their campaigns. We have seen this through both Trump and Harris's appearances on podcasts and other forms of media, as well as various guest speakers at rallies. For example, Beyonce recently spoke at Vice President Harris's rally in Houston to express her support and talk more about the highly discussed subject of women's reproductive rights. Having Beyonce speak helped connect with her own supporters as well as those who agree with her political stance. Marketing strategies such as her appearance have played an important role in connecting with voters from different backgrounds.
Whether it is an in-person appearance or a social media ad, there are several factors at play and strategies to consider when planning each candidate's campaign. And it is not just a short planning process, but one that starts before the official election season and must be reevaluated every day throughout. We wanted to know what it was like to run a political campaign and the level of work that is put in behind the scenes to reach diverse audiences in the United States. Because ultimately, elections rely heavily on the public relations and marketing side of politics, especially in the age of social media. I got to sit down with ACU's Chief Strategy Officer, Blair Schaer, to talk more about this subject and his experience working on political campaigns at the local, state, and national levels. Now let's look at what Mr. Schaer had to say. Thank you, Mr. Schroeder, for being here. I know you have a lot of insight in the PR and marketing side of politics. So just getting into it, I know you've worked for the U.S. Congress serving Representative Jody Arrington and had experience running his political campaign in 2020. Right. So I was wondering, just to start off, if you could talk about that experience and kind of what the main responsibilities are when running a campaign.
Sure, no, great, Ashley. And first, thank you for having me. It's exciting election night. There's so many things that go on. It's an important topic to discuss, and I'm glad y'all are having this event. So working for Congressman Arrington, and you kind of really wear two hats, at least I did in my capacity. So you have the official campaign side, but then you also have the congressional side. So for me, on the campaign side, there's a lot of facets to it, and depending on the market that you're in, certainly out here in West Texas, there's media to be sure, but it's not as aggressive as if you were in a larger metropolitan area like I've been exposed to when I lived in Cincinnati. But you got to raise funds. You got to have money to spend money. And so that's one of the things that's important pieces to it. You got to have the right coalitions in place, and you have to cultivate those coalitions to help get your message out. So whether it's newspaper print ads, if you want to go old school, right down to leveraging social media, we've seen that really blow up over the last several years. And really this year, we've seen a lot more emphasis on podcasts as a medium, the long form interviews to get information out. But then there's nothing that does more for getting the vote out than just good old-fashioned retail politics, going door to door and knocking on doors, shaking hands, kissing babies, all the things that most people know about.
And since you've had experience working on several different campaigns, what would you say are the biggest differences locally and nationally between those?
Great question. So I was telling somebody earlier, when you see it on TV, it's not really like that at all, unless you're on a major campaign. But a lot of races, so I'm on school board, and so it's a small operation, which basically means myself, my wife, some close friends and family, and that's really what that is. But as the races grow in terms of size and scale, typically they cost more, which means you have to be engaged in a different way. And to that point, as you have more money, again, it allows you to spend more money, which allows you to be able to reach audiences in different ways beyond just going to events and showing up, but it's also being able to have, television spots, radio ads, social media ads is certainly something that's been super helpful. But again, you also got to know your segment, right? Certain voting groups that you identify with may or may not be active on social media. So you really got to know your audience, and you have to be able to understand what's the best way to reach them with the message that resonates with them.
Yeah, and so how do the constituents compare locally and nationally? And is there still a lot of criticism found within those local campaigns?
Great question. So I would say, as somebody who's obviously paid attention to national races all the way down to local, as we've seen over the last 10 years, and really probably 12 years, a lot of politics is becoming national. So you're having national issues that show up at the local level. And so we've seen that on any number of topics, whether it be you have the prominent issues that are going on today, whether it be immigration or abortion, what have you. Immigration used to just be a border issue, frankly. But now, if you're in a state that's a non-border state, that's a pretty big issue depending on what the influx has been in your location. So we're seeing trends like that shift. I think that part of that too is also we've seen a lot of news coverage be national, right? So when you think about the old school newspapers, you used to have a newspaper every day. Nowadays it's weekly or it's just online. And so the ways that people are absorbing their news has changed. And so the methods and manners in which you have to try to reach that audience has become different. And so it's tricky. And I think that one of the things that's made it harder as a local person looking at local races, it's costing a lot more money. The other piece I would note is, unfortunately, in my opinion, you're seeing a lot of outside dollars come in to influence local races. And so what that does is it makes it harder to be able to get the message out. That's a local message. Outside dollars typically come with strings attached to the extent of, hey, this is my issue. We saw that actually in the last State House race that we saw play out over March, April, and May across the state of Texas. You had school choice, school vouchers was something that was really a driving topic. There was, I think, $6 million that I know of for sure that came from a Pennsylvania donor. And so, it's interesting, but you had outside money influencing local races. And so that kind of drives the conversation. Where the money comes from, oftentimes, those are the issues that actually get a little bit louder voice, sadly to say.
Yeah, well, just tying everything that you've said together, how have you seen political campaigns and just the races change over time, especially with the use of social media?
Great question. So to me, that's been one of the huge dynamics that I think historians will look at and political scientists will study this race. We saw some of this last time. Last time's a little bit of an outlier because of the fallout from COVID-19. So the way that race was ran was a little different. You couldn't do the retail politics. You weren't going to the diners. I think there's videos of Joe Biden at the time having rallies where people are sitting in their cars listening to it on a radio. So 2020 is kind of an anomaly. I think what we've seen this cycle, you've certainly seen the change with Elon Musk and his purchase of Twitter to where you now have X. We obviously also have heard Mark Zuckerberg talk about Facebook and how they were influenced to some extent on how to cover certain topics. So it'll be really interesting to see how that story unfolds, but hands down, it is one of the most real-time, fastest ways to communicate with an audience. But counter to that, I would note that not everybody's plugged into that. When you look at the social demographics of who's actually engaged,
They have been called for Kamala.
a very fixed segment of society. It's not the real world. And so I think as you have mainstream media, so much of what they're trying to do, from my observation, is they try to draw people to their social media traffic. And so one hand kind of washes the other. But I think we've seen through the Trump campaign, frankly, and frankly, even before that, the RFK campaign, it's been more grassroots, and you've seen podcasts elevate, you've seen other non-traditional platforms of media become more prevalent. And so I guess we'll find out the results later tonight as to how effective that's been.
Well, I just want to thank you again for being here. I really appreciate you coming in to have this conversation.
Hey, thank you, Ashley. Appreciate it.
All right, and go.
Thank you, Ashley, for that amazing interview. Jameson Starrett here with Alexis Adams. Alexis, we've talked here at the break for a little bit. Those key points for both parties, not only the Democrat Party but also the Republican Party, some of those states that were pretty crucial for Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. What were those states tonight?
Yeah, so New York and California have both been called for Kamala. Those were predominantly blue states for the past many years, so Kamala could definitely have relied on those. And they have been called for her. Between California and New York, that is 82 Electoral College points for her, which is crucial for her as she was down a good 70 or 80 points in the last hour or so. Can you tell us about some of the Republican states that have been won for Trump?
Yeah, Trump takes Texas and Florida, two very huge wins for him there. But we're just now reaching the 10 o'clock hour here in Texas, so some of those polls are closing up, not only on the East Coast that have already closed, but on the West Coast as well, getting those final counts in. What do you think is going to be a crucial state? We talked about Pennsylvania. What do you think about Pennsylvania?
Pennsylvania is going to be huge for both, whoever wins this party. Pennsylvania is going to be a game changer. I talked about it a little in my segment about which each president needs to win, and it's going to be the game changer of the night for both of these candidates. We are going to throw it to a break now. Thank you guys so much for listening.
Welcome back inside the studio. Daisy Shrine, Zion Webb. We have a big live update for you. One of our swing states that we mentioned in the beginning has been called. North Carolina has been won by Donald Trump. He's at 230 electoral votes. Kamala Harris at 179 votes, continuing to come in, continuing to pour in this evening. Now, as we continue to look throughout the night at what people are saying online, chief political analyst for the New York Times released a statement saying, for the first time tonight, we consider Trump likely to win the presidency. He has an advantage in each of Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. To win, Harris might need to sweep all 3 of these states. There is still a lot of votes to come in, but for right now, let's send it over to Michaela Clayton at the screen.
Thank you, Daisy. So here we have a chart that shows how young women and men have voted in the last 40-ish years. It shows that there is a wide ideology gap that is continually increasing between men and women globally. This series of charts was pulled from a Financial Times article that discusses the potential consequences of men and women's ideas being so divided. Data from different surveys in each country were used to put these charts together, and they show the political ideology of 18 to 29-year-olds. So the y-axis here shows the percentage of those who have a more liberal stance minus those who are more conservative. We'll start off by talking about the U.S., where the Gallup data shows that after decades of men and women having roughly the same views, women from 18 to 29 are now 30 percentage points more liberal than men their age. Similar to the U.S., Germany also has a 30-point gap between increasingly conservative young men and their progressive female counterparts. And in the U.K., we see a 25-point gap. This can be explained partly because in the U.S., the U.K., and in Germany, young women are now taking a more liberal position on immigration and racial justice than young men. In South Korea, we can see an extreme divide in ideology, where women are 50 more percentage points liberal than men. As you can see, there has been a drastic change in just the last 10 years. In each of these graphs, we can see how after 2010, young men and women's stances really started to become more divided. Even though these 4 countries have very different political systems, you can still compare the ideology from country to country. So for example, the UK on average is more liberal and progressive than the other 3 countries shown here. Now we are going to transition to Paige Canaram, who is interviewing Tamil Adele about ACU's political culture.
I'm here with Tamil Adele, and I'm asking her some questions today. She's our SGA representative. So Tamil, what drew you into politics and SGA specifically?
I believe that SGA stands for hope, and hope materialized in a sense. It's a group of young individuals who love ACU and love government and politics and the idea of change, that they're willing to devote their time to listen and find that change and execute it. And the idea that people can do that. That was very interesting for me, so I wanted to serve as well. And I believe that politics, like anything else, is an art. It's people who are pretty much volunteering their time to go above and beyond for the American people and go above and beyond to make sure that we get what we want and that our voices are heard, even if we don't win all the time.
Awesome. Do you think it's important for students to stay informed on politics?
Oh, 100%. I believe that people don't really understand that whoever wins this election shapes the next 4 years of our lives, or maybe the next 8 years, depending on who wins. Like when I graduate in about 1.5 years, whoever wins determine how easy or hard it is for me to get certain things. So it's very important that young people focus on that, because it's our future at stake, and it's not really a future anymore as it's coming up quickly.
Awesome. And then my last question for you is going to be, how would you describe the political environment at ACU, and how does it compare to other universities?
I think ACU is very unique in the way that we have the political groups on campus. We've made multiple videos about voting and about engaging with democracy, but we haven't taken a stance on either party, which is very important and very pivotal, because it allows our students to understand and know that it's good to have your own ideas. And that's what we're encouraging. And we have different kinds of groups on campus: ACU Democrats, ACU Republicans, and we have the Young Democratic Socialists. And these are not something that you see at every university. Not one group outshines the other. There's a balance in conversation and a balance in communication. And I think that's very important, especially in the times that we live in now.
Thank you so much, Tamil. Up next, we have Ashley in her interview with the representative Stan Lambert. Take it away, Ashley.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to hear about this election season from your perspective. So, just getting into it, as someone running for your 5th term in the Texas House of Representatives, do you think it's important, just as important, to vote in local and state elections as it is to vote in the national election?
Absolutely. I think that it's even more important just because I think government works best at the local level, and the best decisions, best policy decisions, the best overall decisions in terms of providing a pathway to the future are made locally. So these elections are important. Obviously, the national elections garner most of the attention in the media and so forth, but these down ballot races, what we call down ballot races, are just as important.
Well, throughout your time in office, how have you seen young voters, especially college students, have an impact, and how would you encourage them to vote in this election?
I would just say do their research, whatever news source or whatever sources of information that they utilize to make good decisions. I would encourage them to go back and read some of the summaries and reviews and so forth. We're kind of getting down to the wire as far as time is running out, but I would encourage young people to just be as involved as they possibly can be, to realize that these decisions will have an impact on their future and on their children and grandchildren for years to come. So anything I can do to encourage college students as well as those who maybe have just graduated from college and are just kind of getting their start in their career, I think it's very, very important that they take time to become involved and become engaged. A lot of them think one vote doesn't make a difference. Well, I've seen some elections that came down to just a few votes difference, and those were critical decisions for those voters to make, and ultimately, the decisions were made based on who had the most votes, but every vote does count.
Mm-hmm. And since ACU is a Christian university, of which you're an alum yourself, I'm curious what you think about Christians voting and the role that they play in this election.
I think Christians have an even greater responsibility to be engaged. I could give you numerous scriptures that Jesus talked about the role of being involved in the community as far as being neighbors, good neighbors, and treating your neighbor as yourself. There are scriptures that talk about the role of authority and subjecting yourself to that authority. We know that we only have really one ultimate authority, but under the guidance of the government, the way it's structured, we have leaders who are trying to fulfill the responsibility and the mission of hopefully with some emphasis on the teachings and the instruction that we received growing up that Christ exemplified.
Well, I want to thank you again for speaking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Welcome back inside the studio. Another update for you. Kamala has just taken Oregon, another state that we were waiting on to hear their votes. So now the updated electoral numbers are 230 for Donald Trump and 187 for Kamala Harris. We're continuing, Zion and I, to take a look at some tweets and what some people are saying on the web and on social media. So Zion, tell them about a quote we just heard.
Yeah, by Elon Musk, the avid supporter of Donald Trump. He said, game, set, match, whatever that really means. But obviously it looks like in this moment they're winning the matchup right now. And as we said, Donald Trump up 230 to 187. We talked about it a little earlier about how important those swing states were, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Him being up on that, for Harris having to go through and sweep all of those states, that's going to be hard for her. So we'll see throughout the night. This might be our last update to see what the numbers look like. But later on, we'll see how this pans out, seeing what Kamala can do leading towards these later days.
That's right, Zion. We're going to kick it to a quick break, and then we'll be right back to close out our show. Stay tuned for more. always good to say hello to our crew in the studio as we close out our show tonight. We want to thank you so much for joining us in our second ever election show, fully student-led. It's been so much fun getting to work with our executive producer team and to cover so many educational topics throughout the evening. From all 4 executive producers of the 2024 election show, I'm Daisy Strine.
I'm Zion Webb.
I'm Roman Raffelli.
I'm Ashley Henderson.
And from everyone inside the ACU TV or studio, thanks for tuning in. Have a great night, and we'll see you next time.
That's cool.